I'm going to have to ask myself, the question and challenge myself, how do I merge this area of science and the history of science and the politics of science? How does one merge it and, merge it into liberation work, that one is doing now? How do we make it popular? How do we make it mass-oriented? How do we get this knowledge to the vast majority of our people, especially our young people who are so enthused? Those are our warriors, those are our soldiers, but they need to be armed with information, strengthened with knowledge, because knowledge and information is indeed a weapon. So that, as they're forging on the nation state, that we're conscious of this knowledge, of doing Sankofa, of going back into the future in order to bring it, to bear on our present, and our future. That, it seems to me, is one of the key challenges. But the other powerful challenge, which needs to manifest, is this question of a federation of African states. I mean, one of the reservations that one has is that the states as we have them today, on the continent especially, are essentially neo-colonial states. And so a federation of neo-colonial states would be one horrible disaster if, they're run by neo-colonialists. But then a federation of people to people, and it was something that was discussed, one of the issues we're discussing yesterday, with some of the comrades and colleagues, that were around a table with. This question of people-to-people solidarity, so that the issue of African federations, of us, going into a union, it's not just a government thing. It's not state to state, but it's people to people. And so one of the things that, we must push, all of us, is this fundamental question of the global nature of our African identities. That we stop, to see ourselves as Nigerians and Gabonese and, Ghanaians and Congolese and all these other nonsensical identities that we have. But not just that we talk about them like we're talking now, but that it's actually, embedded in our spirits, in our psyche, and in our approach to our work. Because those of you, who are on the continent know that we face, this crisis of religion, this crisis of ethnicism that is tearing us apart. And the only solution to that is going to, to start to address things and see things as a global body. And that when we speak of a federation of African states, we're not just referring to us on the continent, but that we are coming to the table with all of our power. And our power means the millions of Africans in the diaspora. That there's that clarity of understanding. So it's not something we just talk about or we preach about, but that we actually begin to implement in whatever, ways, we're working, whatever little areas of work, that we engage in. So I'll leave you at this time. And I know there's going to be a question and answer session, and I look forward to that. But like, Marcus Garvey's words, I always, quote them. They're internal. And, Sheikh Antedop would agree totally with that. Rise up, you mighty race, for you can accomplish whatever it is that you will. Kwame Nkrumah's words are also relevant. Says organization determines everything. And Sheikh Antedop was very clear about that organization determines everything. And of course, Fanon, standard Fanon. Every generation out of relative obscurity must identify its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. Sisters and brothers, have we identified the mission of our generation? Will we fulfill it or will we betray it? This is the question we need to answer ourselves. Thank you very much.
I think what we are suffering from is ideological confusion at the moment. That is, that we're not clear, we're not thinking clearly, and that we need a context within which to answer the question, is something good or bad? We assume that we have the same goals, but we never say what they are. It's time for us to think and articulate and establish our goals as Black nationalists and Pan-Africanists. We need vision, we need clarity. Otherwise, we can't answer the question, is it good for African people? Once we agree, then we can have a frame of reference and some ideological grounding. Well, let me just give some definitions or give my view of this. Nationalist goal is self-determination in the spirit of Delaney, Garvey, Malcolm, Amos. It is Pan-African commitment, that is the unity of African people worldwide and one Africa on the continent as a basis for African strength. So we are about building a Pan-African world order based on the principles of Ma'at, not in imitation of a European order. Ma'at as justice and truth. We need a nation concept, as Dr. Clark told us, a Black economic program, a cultural program, an independent political organization, independent Black media, independent African-centered education financed by us and controlled by us. All of this presupposes, very importantly, an African Black identity. Now, if we're not just paying lip service to what I've just said, if we really mean this, then there are some implications for this recent election. I want to touch on just a couple. One, the question of identity. Without clarity on this issue, there is no nationalist movement. There is no Pan-African movement. There's no reason for us to be here as a community. Without racial, cultural identity, which works for us as a people and gives us power, then there is no reason for us to be here. That's the basis for our struggle. But what confusion about identity does is it works for integrationists. It works for assimilationists. It works for Marxists.
To retard and reduce the Black child's tremendous potential. There is one thing that must happen. When you have an identity, it is difficult for another person to impose a set of values on you, to retard and reduce the Black child's tremendous potential. There is one thing that must happen. That is the separation of African people from their African selves, from their basic African identities. When you have an identity, it is difficult for another person to impose a set of values on you, because having a positive identity and a solid identity is a defense against being penetrated by alien forces. A positive identity functions to locate us in the world, in space and in time and in history. A positive identity gives us a sense of purpose and a sense of direction. A positive identity provides us with self-knowledge and direction. A positive identity provides us with a sense of belongingness. When we say we are African, we are not merely identifying ourselves as individuals. We indicate that we belong to a people, to a culture, to a nation, that we belong to a system of values, a system of perceptions, a system of behavior, folkways and mores. A system, an identity permits us to cooperate with other people. It permits us to understand what role we must play within a particular group. An identity permits us to know our own interests. An identity permits us to provide ourselves with an evaluative system, permits us to evaluate what is going on in the world. And identity provides us with a defense against possession. have often said that we cannot be African and be slaves and subordinates of other people at the same time. We cannot be fully identified and at one with our African identity and be subordinate to another people. The European, of course, recognized this immediately. That is why when we talk about our slave history, we often talk about the destruction of African culture. We talk about the rewriting of Black history as an attempt, again, of destroying the African culture and an African personality. We recognize that the destruction of that personality, the separating of us from our culture, the separating of us from our history, is a separation of us ultimately from our identity. It means a split and a schism is created in the personality. When a schism and a split is created in the personality, the individual is made exceedingly uncomfortable. It is the first rule of brainwashing. When you wish to brainwash a person, when you wish to transform their personality, you break them from their old personality. You break them from their old moorings. You make them question and doubt their previous culture and their previous learning. When you get them to begin to doubt themselves, when you get them to reject their culture, when you get them to see their past lives as negative, when you get them to feel ashamed of that past life, when you get them to feel guilty of that past life, and any good brainwasher knows this, and you check out the Moonies and any other brainwashing organization, you will see this process being put forth. Once you get that, the individual then is left in a tremendous state of confusion, in a tremendous state of ambivalence. That state is painful. It motivates the individual then to seek some kind of relief, to seek some way out. Then it becomes the function of the brainwasher to say, if you follow my way, if you accept my definition, if you do it the way I say do it, if you look at it the way I say look at it, if you value it the way I say value it, then you will feel better. See how happy we are, often in these semi or quasi-religious brainwashing places, you see the people running around smiling and they're all glory and they're all happy and they're all loving and they're all, and here's this confused person cut off from family, cut off from his community, cut off from everything he's known, and is filled with pain. And yet these people seem to be so loving. They seem to be so brotherly. They seem to be so sisterly. Then let me get what they have. And of course, these people are here to say, see, if you thought the way we thought, if you look at things the way we look at it, you'll be happy. You'll be one. You'll be accepted. Then often the individual then accepts the values and the orientation of the brainwashing group and then becomes a part of that group. The splitting then of the African personality is a necessary process in inculcating into that personality an alien personality, an alien spirit, creating the personality of servitude. It makes possible then in that African personality, that is the split African personality, makes it possible then for the African to begin to believe the lies, to accept the European distortion, to accept
One, two, 1, 2. All right. Just making sure everybody can hear. Give me a signal in the chat, kings and queens, if you can hear me. Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the mother, father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai, Mudzimu Mukodo, give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodia, African power and African liberation for all African people. Yes, we're there, we're gonna enjoy this session today. I'll let you know from the jump, it might be a bit of a long one, but stay with, man. And if the vibes is nice, then we may entertain some discussion, after we got through some things. All right. You were just listening to a combination of Auntie Affiong El Affiong, Mama Marimba Ani, and Nana Amos Wilson, yeah, all speaking on the subject of the day, which is the power, the politics and power of African identity, yeah, the power and politics of African identity. It just occurred to me that I need to do something very quickly, so I'm going to leave you with Amos Wilson for like 30 seconds, yeah, and come back. All right, so hold tight 1 second.
Accept European reality, to accept then the stereotypes the Europeans have projected. And it's very interesting as you ride the subways today, and it becomes an embarrassing event to watch our youngsters use the degrading term they use again and again, so loudly, so unselfconsciously. When I grew up, the idea of using this term in public, the idea of letting white folk hear you using that term, calling one, letting any other group of people hear you referring to yourself by that term was unbelievable. But now this seems to be the coin of the realm. And we hear it all the time. Yeah, that nigga did it, that nigga that. You know, it just goes again and again and again. People must have been destroyed in many ways to talk about themselves in public and to be this way so loudly and so clearly.
All right, kings and queens, sorry for that. We're back now. Yeah, so share the link far and wide, family. We're going to go into some things, yeah? You know what I'm saying? We're going to go into some things today. And it's an interesting one. Now, this is a presentation that I've delivered in an abbreviated form, yeah, before. Last year, I believe it was, and if it wasn't last year, it was the year before that. I hosted a discussion featuring my good brother Omowale, Africa, and also Sister Jam Wuyor, yeah, and we had a conversation entitled "The Power, the Politics and Power of African Identity in the 21st Century." And so I had put together this presentation and I delivered a part of it for that conversation there. It was abbreviated because obviously I had two other guests and wanted to, you know, to hear from them and have you all hear from them as well on the subject. And so this is really just the fuller length version, yeah. And I may skip 1-2 slides because, you know, me can go in, you know, for a few hours and all them something there. Here and there, but you know, it's a kind of wordy because we're breaking down a lot of different concepts, yeah, but it's necessary. And the reason why I'm redoing this is because one, because I haven't delivered the fuller presentation yet, and two, because it's pertinent to a lot of conversations that are going right, you know, in this social media, YouTube, conscious community space, yeah, where African identity seems to be a hot topic. All right, and you got people on all kinds of different sides of the debate and the conversation, and I think I have something to offer the conversation that is probably not present in the conversation as it stands, or maybe not as emphasized as it should be, yeah. And so this is just my contribution to that vibration, all right. And I'll say from the jump, sorry, I am a universal African nationalist. I am a Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist, yeah? And so I will be reasoning from that perspective. And in doing so, I will be challenging, yeah, very directly, any ideology or school of thought that seeks to neutralize, yes, the political application of African identity and or negate the concept of African identity in and of itself. And no, those are not necessarily the same things, yeah. So you can negate the concept of African identity. You say it doesn't exist, there's no such thing as African identity. And on the other hand, you can also accept that, you know, there's something called African identity, but deny or negate or seek to neutralize its political application. And when we try to neutralize the political application of African identity, we are effectively attempting to de-revolutionize it. Yeah, to depoliticize African identity is to de-revolutionize it. All right. And so, you know, we have to defend the legacies of our ancestors and the power potential of our future generations to be able to organize around certain foundational principles. All right. So we're going at the thing. Yeah, we're going go in at the thing. Yeah, so share up the video, share up the link far and wide, let people them know it's a Shakara live right now and what the subject matter is. What may I say? Yeah, what the subject matter is, and we may be engaging some conversation little later on. All right, so I'm gonna go share my screen again. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna share with screen again and all of these things. I will not be taking any questions during the presentations. Yeah, anything named question and conversation, I have to go on after. Yeah, and I do sometimes do it during, but you know, there's a lot to get through today, so we're going at the thing. All right. Having said that, Coffee Campbell, your question will be answered right near the beginning of the presentation. So do stay tuned. Let's go. All right. Having said that, sorry, let me just say big up to Afrifinker, big up to Mr. Spacely, yeah, and Coffee Campbell in the building. Like I said, share the link far and wide, yeah, let the people them get a good dose of this universal African nationalist energy, and we're gonna go in editing. All right. Okay. So one of the things that I didn't do, yeah, when I first delivered the presentation alongside my brother Omowale and my sister Jam, was to delve deep in the definition them, yeah. And I think I even said that, yeah. Normally you would define all the terminologies, right? So the first section of this is just going to be about defining the terminologies. Most of the definitions that I'm using, yeah, are drawn from Wikipedia, and I've accented them with some more specific African-centered definitions here and there. All right, and that's because I find that Wikipedia, when it comes to issues of social sciences, tends to give relatively good synopses and definitions of the concepts. Yeah, it's like the difference between reading an ordinary Oxford dictionary and a dictionary of politics, right? Or a dictionary of economics. Yeah, you get definitions that are specific to a field, yeah, that you won't necessarily get if you are just reading a standard dictionary. All right, and so I find that Wikipedia tends to do that. So for things like social sciences, I would often draw on Wikipedia definitions. So usually, yeah, the definitions of Wikipedia as except where stated otherwise. All right, got a 1-2 Oxford in there, and we draw from some African-centered luminaries to give further exploration of the concepts. Yeah, so the first section of the presentation will be a minute still. Yeah, but we have to get through this. We're just defining terms. All right, that's all we are gonna do. Yeah, for the foreseeable. Yeah, just define some terms. Yeah, that's all we are gonna do. So sit tight, hold tight, stay with me. We're going on some things today. You know, see it. All right. And I hope ones and ones overstand. Yeah. Agreement is not a requirement, but overstanding, yeah, is more important than agreement. All right. So let's first define politics. All right. So that we begin, yeah, with the definition of politics that's provided by Oxford and Wikipedia. Right, this is a combination. The set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relations among individuals, such as the distribution of resources or status. Yeah. Okay, now this is interesting, all right, because distribution of resources would be considered to be economics. Yeah, but in reality, yeah, there is no politics without economics, and there is no economics without politics. Yeah, okay, these are related disciplines. All right, and so when we speak in universal African nationalist terms, we speak in terms of political economy. All right, we're not divorcing these two things. We understand that they are relational. Okay, and secondly, the activities involved in getting and using power in public life. Yeah. And being able to influence decisions that affect a country or a society. Okay, so the definition number 2, the second one here, makes it specific to nation state, yeah, or country. Yes. Definition number 1 here is broader. All right. So politics takes place on varying different levels. Politics doesn't need a country or a state, yeah, in order to manifest itself. All right, because it is the set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relations, among individuals, such as the distribution of resources or status. Okay. All right, so we have to bear that in mind. Yeah, oftentimes we reduce politics to what takes place within the realms of government of a specific, in this day and age, nation state. But that is not the confines of politics. That is an example or a particular expression of politics. All right. We take this further. This is me being initiated into manhood, yeah, in the year 2004. The man that you can see behind me, or the men that you can see behind me, are my uncles and my father. My father is the one speaking. And this is here because as a part of our initiation process, we were taken through what is called the Coloniser, yeah, which is a Shona word which relates to the idea of having a body of knowledge, yeah. And so we were asked various different questions, and I had to be able to answer these questions at the initiation ceremony itself from memory. All right. And so we were taught in the Al-Qaeda and Revivalist movement growing up that politics is the science and art of power acquisition and nation building from a clear philosophical and ideological perspective. Yeah. What do we mean by science? Science is natural law or knowledge that has been tested and proven. What do we mean by art? Art is skill and craft in the application of knowledge. Yeah. So the science is the study, yes, and the acquisition of the knowledge, and the art is the application of that knowledge in terms of social relations. Well, that's what politics is, but that also relates to to economics, and other disciplines. Yeah. All right. So politics is the science and art of power acquisition and nation building, and I should add to that, nation maintenance. Yeah, because politics continues once the nation is built. All right, power acquisition and nation building or nation maintenance from a clear philosophical and ideological perspective. There are no politics, yes, or political relationships, political activities that do not begin from the basis of ideation, all right, or perspective. Yeah, that's fundamental. Okay, all politics takes place within the realms of ideation or ideology and perspective or philosophical ideas. Yeah, we have to understand that particular dynamic. All right, I hope ones and ones are with me. Bear with me. Like I said, we're going to go through a number of different definitions, all related to the title and the subject matter of today. Okay, all right, but the emphasis here is that we cannot reduce politics to what takes place in number 10 Downing Street. Debates between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. Election every 4 years. And whether we vote. That's an expression of politics, but it's a specific expression of politics that we will get to later on. What we're going to define is nation. What is a nation? A nation is a community of people formed on the basis of a combination of shared features, such as language, history, ethnicity, culture, and or territory. So it can be any combination of the above. A nation is thus the collective identity of a people, of a group of people, understood as defined by those features, i.e., language, history, ethnicity, culture, and territory, etc. Yeah. A nation is generally more overtly political than an I should say ethnic group or ethnicity. It has been described as a fully mobilized or institutionalized ethnic group. Once again, a fully mobilized or institutionalized ethnic group. A nation has also been defined as a cultural political community that has become conscious of its autonomy. What did I hear me say? A nation has also been defined as a cultural political community that has become conscious of its autonomy, unity, and particular interests. So a nation is distinct from a nationality and a nation state. A nation doesn't require a nation state or a nationality in order to exist, in order to be conscious of itself. In fact, practically every nation state that exists today, yes, prior to its formally coming about, was predicated upon the realization of a national consciousness. Yeah. And that includes colonies, because colonies are an expression of the national consciousness of the colonizer. Okay. So let's go forward. What is a nationality? Nationality is a legal identification. Nation doesn't require you to have a legal identification. Nationality is a legal identification of a person in international law, establishing the person as a subject, a national of a sovereign state. It affords the state jurisdiction over the person, and affords the person the protection of the state against other states. Okay, so this is a particular expression, yes, of nationhood, which is confined to particular nation states and legally recognized institutions and bodies, normally governments, and governments as backed up by militaries and related economic institutions. All right. I hope everyone's following me. Yeah, we're just defining terms to lay the foundation for what we're about to get into. All right. This is what I didn't do when I was hosting Brother Omowale and Sister Jam. All right. So what is a state? Various different definitions of the state. And this is why, again, I appreciate Wikipedia, because it will explore issues such as this. All right. There is no academic consensus on the definition of the state. The term state refers to a set of different but interrelated and often overlapping theories about a certain range of political phenomena. Centralized, and these are some of the definitions now, centralized institutions that impose rules and back them up by force. Yeah, that idea of force, yeah, military and paramilitary, yeah, it seems to replicate itself across definitions of the state. All right, over a territorially circumscribed population, a distinction between the rulers and the ruled, and an element of autonomy, stability, and differentiation. That's one definition. Another is a compulsory political organization with a centralized government that maintains a monopoly on the legitimate use of force within a certain territory. Okay. So again, oftentimes, but not all the times, nationality in this day and age, yeah, is synonymous with the concept of state or nation state. Yeah. Nation and nationhood in general does not require the existence of a state. You can be a culturally recognized nation but not have a state apparatus at your disposal at a particular moment in time. Okay? All right. Let's go forward. We're going in on these definitions for a purpose here, and I hope ones and ones appreciate it as we go forward. So what is a nation state? Yeah, you have state and then you have nation state. A nation state is a political unit where the state and the nation are congruent. Yes, so this is where you get nation and state. All right, it is a more precise concept than country, since a country does not need to have a predominant ethnic group. So this idea presumes that within this state, the statehood is informed by a specific nationhood. All right. For example, I live in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Yeah, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, which is predominantly as a statehood defined by the nationhood of people that were referred to as Anglo-Saxons, who dominated an area that became known as the Angles, and later became known as England. Yes, and that particular nation consciousness defined and had an inordinate influence over what later becomes the United Kingdom of Great Britain. All right, so them co-opting the Scots and the Irish and the Welsh and all them something there. And even though, you know, there's tensions between all these groups, you know, they managed to unite enough to be able to colonize a third of the planet right? At one point in history. Okay, in a more general sense, a nation state is simply a large politically sovereign country or administrative territory. One of the defining definitions, the characteristics of a state, is clearly defined borders. Yeah, so you've had nations that have existed throughout history where the borders are not so clearly defined. Yeah, the military apparatus as associated with the state is not such an implicit factor in the existence of the state. Yeah, there are countries and nations that have existed throughout history that don't have standing armies, for example. Yeah, and these are characteristics that are associated with statehood, very specifically. All right. Okay. A polity. What is a polity? All right. It's the word that is often used in these discourses about Africanness, Africa, and the continent in particular. What is a polity? Yeah. A polity is an identifiable political entity. That's it. A group of people with a collective identity who are organized by some form of institutionalized social relations and have a capacity to mobilize resources. That's a polity. A polity can be any group, any other group of people organized for governance, such as a corporate board. Yeah. So a company or corporation can be recognized or is recognized as a polity. The government of a country subdivision, or a sovereign state. So all of these are examples of polities. In geopolitics, a polity can be manifested in different forms, such as a state, an empire, an international organization, which is not a state or an empire, a political organization, and other identifiable resource manipulating organizational structures. A polity, like a state, does not need to be a sovereign unit. The most preeminent polities today are Westphalian states and nation states, commonly referred to as countries and also incorrectly referred to by the term nations. Yeah. Okay. So these are the most common polities today. Yeah. But they're not. But the term polity is not exclusive to a state. It's not exclusive to a country. Is not exclusive even to just a nation. Any political organization or political entity of a group with a collective identity that mobilizes resources is a polity. That's what a polity is. It's not just a nation state. I hope ones and ones are overstanding where we're going with this. Yeah, well, let's engage in some definitions. Yeah, well, let's engage in some definitions. All right, kings and queens. Yeah, so I hope ones and ones are following the discourse so far. I know this is a lot, yeah, for the brain right about now, but follow me. All right, follow me. It will make sense. I promise you. Okay. All right. And once again, as you come through, share up the video and like up the video at all. Like it up and share it up and all of these things. And if ones and ones want to, yeah, it's not a requirement, but if ones and ones want to, then we shall entertain some discussion later on. All right. If the need requires. Okay, let's go forward. More definition. Identity, central to today's discourse. What is an identity? Oxford definition is about to come. Yeah, the fact of being who or what a person is. Yes, the being of the isness of the person. Yeah, is what identity is. All right. Okay. All right. The characteristics determining who or what a person is. Okay. So the characteristics determining the isness of the person or a group of people is what identity is. And finally, a close similarity or affinity, what we feel closely similar or have an affinity towards, yes, is a contributory factor to our identity. And then finally, we're going to define civics. All right. And this probably should have been higher up in the definitions. The reason being is because people often confuse politics for civics or reduce politics to civics exclusively. Civics is the study of the rights and duties of citizenship. Civics relates to the specific political organization, rules, responsibilities, modes of interaction and relationship within a specific nation or nation state that one is a recognized citizen of. Yeah. So politics is broader than just civics. Politics is the art and science of power acquisition, nation building, and nation maintenance. Civics is the study of the rights and duties of citizenship. All right. So whenever you hear, yes, a discussion in which somebody is reducing the broader concept of politics to just civics, they are minimizing or they are using a deficient understanding of what politics is. Okay. Politics doesn't begin with the existence of citizenship or a nation state. Let's bear that in mind. All right. We go forward. This should have been a slide up. Apologies for the wrong order. Something's happened here. Yeah, but we'll get through it. To embellish upon this definition of identity that was just given, we're going to pray on the wisdom of Nana Amos Wilson. All right. In the book Blueprint for Black Power, the Helios Biblos, yeah, the crystallizer of the Black nationalist philosophy in the 21st century. We are eternally grateful for the efforts and the work of Nana Amos Wilson, who actually passed away in the year 1995, having just about finished this text. Yeah, I want people to know the sacrifice. And for those who want some insight into this, I have a beautiful interview on this channel with Baba Sababu Plata, who is the co-founder of African World Info Systems, which is the publishing company of Nana Amos Wilson. All right. And he continues to publish Nana Amos Wilson's works and compile unpublished works. Yeah. And so we are eternally grateful for Baba Sababu Plata. Yeah. And check out that interview. It's powerful and even emotional. All right. Identity as a personal or collective phenomena is as much, if not more, a political economic entity as it is a purely social or psychological entity. As a political economy, identity is an organization of interests. I want you to hold that word there. Yeah? Organization of interests. Pause for effect. Organization of interests, taste, desires, passions, ideals, motives, values, knowledges, abilities, skills, etc. It's an organization of all of these things, but preeminently for the sake of discussion, we want to focus on interests. The pursuit, satisfaction, exercise, and realization of which helps to maintain the social power relations, social prerogatives, and the integrity of social, political, economic systems which characterize a particular culture and its status quo. Give me 2 seconds, kings and queens. Sound like me have a go on downstairs, all right? Just give me 2 seconds. I apologize profusely for this slight interruption in the proceedings. All right, let's give me 2 seconds. Sorry, kings and queens. Family just come home and somebody left them key, obviously. Yeah, the house. You know what I mean? You know how these things go. All right, live and direct. This is live. You know, so this is live right now, isn't it? All right. Big up the brother Sam P. Collins. You know what I'm saying? One God, one aim, one destiny, my brother. Big up Mr. IC3 in the building. Once again, share out the link far and wide. Invite enough people in that conversation. Yeah, because we are going on some things and we're just getting started, really and truly. All right. Okay. Where was I up to? We're saying social prerogatives and the integrity of social, political, economic systems which characterize a particular culture and its status quo. An identity is an expression of the culture. Hey, son. Don't worry. Yeah. The individual's personality is formed by and reflects the political, social, and economic character of the culture and society into which he is born and nurtured. Societies and cultures socialize individuals to adapt to, contribute to, and to operate in their unique socio-economic system. Identity is an expression of culture. Yeah. And so we don't discuss within Pan-African liberation, universal African nationalist context. We don't discuss identity outside of the context of culture. And we don't discuss culture outside of the context of power. And power is the primary subject for today's discourse. I want you to understand them thing there profusely. All right. Continuing in the book, Falsification of African Consciousness. Culture, because identity is an expression of culture, defines attitudes, values, and goals. What a person perceives as important, worth sacrificing for. What you identify with also tells us what you are going to sacrifice for. What is good, true, and beautiful is determined by culture. The culture controls certain individual goals and ambition through a system of punishment and reward. Each society excels in those activities which the culture rewards and encourages. There's a lot of talk right now, in Britain about reinforcing British values in the education system. Yeah. And I work in an educational institution at the moment, and there was a poster on the wall, and it said British values are, and it gave some examples: democracy, yes, rule of law, individual. It wasn't freedom, but individual something or another, individual rights maybe, or something like that. Yeah, and one other thing that I cannot remember. All right. But when you say I am British, yes, there are certain principles and values that you are identifying as your own. Yeah, there are certain there's a certain history that you are identifying as your own. There are certain institutions that you are identifying as your own. There are certain expressions that you are identifying as your own. And British patriotism is an expression of the loyalty to this particular nation state, what is worth sacrificing for. So we understand that implicitly. But this becomes particularly important if we consider the interests associated with an identity. Because the interests are not benign. The interest of the colonizer is not the same as the interest of the colonized. So if the colonized begin to adopt the colonizer's identity, in whose interest do they begin to work in the actualization and the realization of that identity? That is the question that we have to ask. And in asking that question, we have to engage a process called deconstruction. And deconstruction is defined as a method of critical analysis of philosophical and literary language, which emphasizes the internal workings of language and the conceptual systems, the relational quality of meaning, and the assumptions implicit in forms of expression. In other words, every identity, as I've just stated, has a set of principles and values associated with it. Those principles and values are a reflection of the unique history in the actualization of the existence of that identity. So there are certain assumptions inherent within specific identities and how they act in the world, how they function in the world. That is why certain language, certain terminology, certain expression, certain ideas are associated with specific identities. And so we have to go through the process of analyzing the philosophy within the identity itself, how it comes about, in what context it comes about, what purpose is it designed to serve, and how is that purpose expressed through language. We as African people, yes, Mr. African people, first, foremost, and fundamentally, nah beg no friend, must, because of our unique historical experience, engage in an analysis of the identities that A, we call our own, and 2, were imposed upon us through the Ma'afa. Yeah? And on that point, you'll notice that there's a couple words that I haven't defined. One, principally for the sake of time. One is African or African people, and the other is power. This is because as we go through the presentation, how we are defining African and power becomes apparent implicitly as we begin to deconstruct our identities and reconstruct our identity, if that makes sense. So pay attention to that. Yeah, for anybody wondering, but how come he didn't define African and he didn't define power? Yeah, that's the reason why. All right. I hope ones and ones understand that science. All right. So we now turn to this text. Yeah, a little known text, but a powerful text. Yeah, by an elder scholar who is not as well known as I believe he should be in our world African community and even in our Pan-African community. He goes by the name of Kwesi Pra, and I also have an interview with him on this platform, should you want to check it out. All right. Anthropological Prisms is the book, Studies on African Realities. So in order to assist us in deconstructing our reality and our identities as associated with our reality, we're drawing this text. And we're drawing this text principally because of the idea that is often espoused that Africa is a continent of 54 countries. That Africa, prior to being a continent of 54 countries, was a continent of warring tribes. The African people descend from groups of people whose only interaction with each other, or let's say predominant interaction with each other across recognized people groups referred to as tribes, was in the context of warfare, beef, disagreement, division, fracture, cannot get along. This is the impression that we are given from certain readings of history. Well, Baba Kwesi Pra helps us to deconstruct the analysis as it is imposed upon African identity or African identities. European expansion not only radically altered the historical mode of non-European societies, but also reconstructed and re-narrated the historical accounts of their societies before the European encounter. Today, the real problem is that too many of us, even in the non-Western world, have what? Adopted the blinkered Western perspective in our appreciation and understanding of our realities. We have what? Adopted the blinkered Western perspective in our appreciation and understanding of what? Our realities. We look at ourselves through Western eyes. Serious business this. He says, sadly and significantly, we open the post... Sorry, let me just explain this for a little piece more here. Because this is prior to colonialism now, right? He's saying that what colonialism did is actually rewrote the history prior to colonialism. And as a result, many peoples of the world, including we ourselves, began to fit ourselves into the colonial mode as the primary means of understanding ourselves. Yeah? So a couple of examples. One of them is the division of people groups, yeah, on the African continent specifically. And I don't mean on the level of tribe now. I'm talking on the level of terms like Hamite, Hamitic, Semite, Semitic, Nilotic, Bantu, yeah, and so on, Afro-Asiatic, yeah, and so on. All right. And it's funny to me that when the same people who tend to characterize African pre-colonial civilization with this tribal warfare characterization seem to also accept and adopt these larger people group identifications that are actually the product of Western European anthropological designations. What I mean by that is there's no word in an African language that is synonymous with Nilotic, Cushitic. Bantu is an African word, yeah, but as an anthropological designation, in order to make something distinct from Cushitic, yeah, what's it called? And Nilotic, for example, yeah, is completely outside of the realities of indigenous African people groups. But people accept it. Why? Because white people say so. Yeah. And so we have many Africans today who use terms like Nilotic and Cushitic, yes, in order to self-define. But ask them how them say Nilotic and Cushitic in them language. How you say Nilotic, yeah, in Luo, or Cushitic in Somali, yeah? Or you say that? Yeah, is there does that concept exist indigenously among the people them? Yeah, and it don't exist. All right, okay, but we accept that though, right? And the same people that say African is not legitimate will also accept Cushitic and Nilotic and Afro-Asiatic and Hamitic, yeah, and all of these things. That's one way. Another way is the actual direct ways in which the colonial process co-opted indigenous social order, right? So that's the co-optation of indigenous chieftaincies, or the creation of centralized chieftaincy systems where they did not exist. And an example of that would be among the Igbo or among the Ga in West Africa. Yeah, they didn't have like a royal family. Yeah, they were known to be a decentralized community of people related. Yeah, but governed in terms of social order by what would be referred to improperly as priests. yeah, in that respect, or Wulome in the Ga context, and Dibia and other roles and titles among the Igbo. Yeah. Okay, that's the two examples. I want to move on for the sake of time. Sadly and significantly, we open the post-colonial era with the same albatross of Eurocentric historical periodization. Independent African countries and obliging historians quickly invented new histories for their countries. The history of Zambia, the history of Ghana, the history of Ivory Coast, the history of Namibia, etc., appeared for countries which had a few years earlier not existed. Even in those cases where they had previously existed during the colonial period, often under different names, they had not existed as identifiable and separate countries before the end of the 19th century. Specifically, he's referring to 1884, 1885 of the Berlin Conference. The implications of these historical inventions and the identities they spawned have had serious implications for Africans since the end of the colonial period. What does he mean? Yeah, we all know the story. 1884, 1885. These European nations, Britain, France, Spain, Belgium, Portugal, Germany, who were the ones who actually called the conference, they were all vying for land, yeah, on the African continent, and had been doing so for the better part of the whole of the 1800s, creating wars between themselves and other African indigenous groups, and sometimes between each other over the land of indigenous African people groups. And so in 1884, 1885, Otto von Bismarck, yeah, called after relatively recently forming the nation of Germany, yeah, based upon it's what I got. Sorry, kings and queens, something's happened here. Based upon an identity that pre-existed the nation state, that the identity was realized, yeah, as the nation state of Germany. Forgive me, kings and queens. Let me just sort out this situation. Yeah, they called the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885. I'm not sure what is happening here. Something has completely gone wrong. It looked like the forces of COINTELPRO have attempted or are attempted to sabotage Shakara presentation. Yeah, some self-hating Negro has alerted the powers that be as to the nature of this presentation right about now. And okay, it looks like we're getting we'll get somewhere. All right. Hold on there. From current slide. Okay, hold on. Sorry, I need to share my screen again. 1 second. Sorry about this, kings and queens. We're getting there. Big up to Nama X in the building. And anybody else? Okay. All right. Let me make sure everybody can see what I go on. All right. So yeah, so they cut up the African continent and created most of the borders that we see today. And we know that they cut between the different people groups. Yeah, so you'll find Ashanti in Ghana, or Akan in Ghana, in Burkina Faso, in Togo, and in Cote d'Ivoire. Yeah, you'll find Yoruba in Benin, as well as Nigeria. There's Yoruba even in Sierra Leone. You'll find Luo in Kenya, Sudan, Uganda, yeah, and so on and so forth. And the Luo in part of this book, he actually explains the fact that the Luo is one of the bigger people groups, yeah. But in every country that they're in, they are a minority. All right, because of the way that the borders were cut, yeah, it just basically cut up the whole of the Luo nation. All right. And this idea, okay, we're gonna get to the idea of tribe in a second. Yeah. So that had implications, but we began to self-define and even reinforce, yeah, these borders that were developed specifically for the purpose of facilitating the colonial rule and the economic interests of Europeans who managed to leverage their separate identities, French, British, Spanish, Belgian, Portuguese, American, etc., etc., under the banner of being European, white, and Western in order to collaborate in the colonization of Africa and African people. All right, let's deal with this. By the way, Kwesi Pra, he's born in Ghana, currently lives in South Africa, where he's lived for the last couple of decades still. Yeah, I'm saying that for a reason, which I'll elucidate later on. Yeah, this beautifully smiling African woman is Dr. Foluke Adebisi. Yeah, she is a lecturer at the University of Bristol, and one who is forwarding Pan-African theory in the academy. And I had the pleasure of taking part. I spoke at a conference called Re-engaging Pan-Africanism at Birmingham City University in 2018. Dr. Foluke was another one of the speakers at the conference. And so she was kind enough to share her paper with me, which I'm going to quote from shortly. Yeah. What she's looking at here is the concept of tribe. Yeah. And we're looking at this because within Pan-African circles, it has been the modus operandi when discussing African indigenous people groups and nations to use the word nation as opposed to tribe. Yeah. To use the word, so we don't refer to the Yoruba as a tribe. We refer to the Yoruba as a nation. We don't refer to the Yoruba, to the Zulu and the Xhosa and the Ndebele and the Kikuyu and the Maasai and the Bakongo as tribes. We refer to them as nations. We do not refer to the Dinka and the Luo as tribes. We refer to them as nations. Why? Dr. Foluke Adebisi says, it may be presumed that the best way in which to speak of Africa with an anti-colonial script would be through the medium of tribe. However, the word and concept of tribe carries within it so much of the colonial narrative that it is an unreliable narrator of reality. We are deconstructing identity. We are deconstructing the terminology that is used to give expression to our identities. Okay? We're not just accepting the dominant narrative for the sake of accepting the dominant narrative. We are engaging in a critical analysis of the dominant narratives and its utility to us as African peoples, continent or diaspora. Tribe is an inexact descriptor. It does not correlate to size or there are people groups on the African continent who are referred to as tribe, even though their population size is comparable to some entire nations. Yeah. It does not correlate to size or composition or internal homogeneity. Yes. It obfuscates reality and history, mythologizing, fetishizing, and reducing African pre-colonial polities, and carries within it the pejoratives of outdated social theory, including primitiveness and savagery. Tribe arises directly out of the racial categories which served as justification for colonization. This is an interesting point, you know. Whereas we have many who want to negate the concept of race on a scientific basis, but at the same time reinforce the concept of tribe scientifically. What Dr. Foluke Adebisi is highlighting here is that the tribal characterization is synonymous with the racial characterization of African people in the minds of European colonizers, and more specifically, Western anthropologists and theologians. I hope the ones are following where I'm going with this. All right, all on there. That's something on my stick. Okay, right. Most African languages have no similar word for tribe. Words used by Africans to self-identify are more similar to people or nation. So we say people group, we say nation. The colonial creation of tribe basically replicates the colonial creation of state, in that it traps fluid humanity into cultural and nationalistic borders they did not choose. The idea of tribe conjures this idea that these people live over here, so these people live over there, so, and them never interact, except maybe if there's a tribal war going on. Yeah. Other than that, they have no relationship. They have no means of relating cordially, productively, amenably. That doesn't exist among tribes. That's not the concept that we associate with tribes. We don't associate concepts of higher forms of social and people organization with tribe, because tribes are primitive, yeah, and so on. All right. It doesn't consider the fact that Africans traveled across so-called tribes. Yeah. And married into. Anyway, let's move on. I'm doing a lot of explaining. Intercultural nationality boards I did not choose. It prevents agency, change, and development. This is important. The people them that reinforce this idea of the tribal consciousness do so to negate the conscious development of African peoples along Pan-African lines, but don't seem to do it when it comes to the national borders, the nation-state borders that are defined by Europeans. So it appears that Africans can develop nation-state borders defined by Europeans under the authority of Europeans, but cannot, through our own agency and the will for change and development, develop our own larger people group formations. It's what I go on. It is the starting point of epistemic violence. The creation of tribe is a sub-step in the creation of the state, and thus the decolonization of tribe should be part of the decolonization of knowledge of Africa. I believe that speaks for itself. I am not going to extemporize anymore for the sake of time, although much could be extemporized upon within that. We return to Baba Kwesi Pra. In much the same way that colonialism created cheese where it did not exist, as I mentioned earlier, anthropologists raised sub-nationalities or sub-ethnicities to the conceptual status of tribes. The Dinka in the Sudan were conceptually split into the Atwat, the Gogrial, the Boer, etc. The Madi Moro group was split into Madi, Lugbara, Olubo, Avukaya, Kaliko in the Sudan, Logo, Madi, Lugbara in Uganda, and Logo, Avukaya, Kaliko, Lugbara in Congo, Zaire. The theoretical and scientific limitations and distortions of this approach has been partially scrutinized by Marquette, who is an anthropologist, French anthropologist, who suggested that study of large units in Africa. You got to see. Okay. Good night, boys. All right. Where was I? Sorry, Kings and Queens. Suggest that study of large units in Africa would be no mean contribution, I should say, to the anthropological theory. Yeah. Again, bear this in mind. Study of what? Large units in Africa would be no mean contribution to anthropological theory. But Shakara, did Africa have large units, large social units, large political units? No, Africa only had tribes, Shakara. What you deal with? Yeah, tribes never formed large units with each other. That never happened in pre-colonial African civilization and society, except Egypt. And we all know that Egypt is not an African civilization. Gosh. Let's move forward. Yeah, this point cannot be underemphasized. One of the most important challenges facing anthropology in Africa today is identifying what? Optimal cultural units on the basis of which development efforts can be constructed. Under colonialism, anthropology became a science of tribes in cultural contact and the process of acculturation. Anthropology became about how can we get these savage Negroes to accept the benefits of higher civilization and stop warring and savaging each other. Yeah, that's what that's about. Administrative principles, which are methodologically constructed along the lines of proliferated divisions, facilitated the process of rule. Yeah, so the emphasis of the tribal consciousness was deliberately manufactured to facilitate the rule of the colonizer, which is why within the process of African liberation efforts, African liberation freedom fighters have sought not to negate the existence and the legitimacy of indigenous people groups, but to decolonize the concept of those people groups as associated with the idea of tribe. Get rid of the antagonism inherent with that concept, yeah, and emphasize the relationship culturally, linguistically, spiritually, economically among groups of African people. So one is coming from a colonial European, Western Eurocentric consciousness. The other is coming from an African-centered, African liberation-oriented intentionality and interest. The segmentary lineages became instruments of the colonial administrative policy. All right. So we've just been told that it would be good if we can analyze larger units, social units among African people. Well, a good place to start in this regard is pre-colonial Black Africa. Yeah. Another good place to start is Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. All right. It's another good place to start. Yeah. He goes into some stuff there. All right. Dealing with political institutions within different people groups and how they became strengthened or weakened and, you know, therefore became ripe for colonization and conquest and invasion and enslavement and so on and so forth. Okay. But pre-colonial Black Africa by Baba Sheikh Anthony is also a good place to start. All right. And I'm just taking from the introduction because he explains the purpose of why he wrote the book. Yeah. Until now, 1960, the date of the first edition, the history of Black Africa has always been written with dates as dry as laundry list. And no one has almost ever tried to find the key that unlocks the door to the intelligence, the understanding of what? African society. We have to understand that the dominant tools that we have at our disposal that are given to us do not assist us in unlocking the door to understand ourselves and our societies as a people on the continent and in the diaspora, failing which no researcher has ever succeeded in revivifying the African past, in bringing it back to life in our minds, before our very eyes, so to speak, while remaining strictly within the realm of science. We're not just dealing with arbitrary designations, feel-good factor, no. We're dealing with a scientific analysis. Because politics is the science and art of power acquisition, nation building, and nation maintenance and management. Yet, the documents at our disposal allow us to do that practically without any break in continuity for a period of 2,000 years, at least insofar as West Africa is concerned. Therefore, it had become indispensable to unfreeze, in a manner of speaking, to defossilize the African history, which was there at hand, lifeless, imprisoned in the documents. However, this work is not, properly speaking, a book of history, but it is an auxiliary tool indispensable to the historian. Indeed, it indeed affords him a scientific understanding of all the historical facts hitherto unexplained. In that sense, it is a study in African historical sociology. It permits us no longer to be surprised at the stagnation, or rather the relatively stable equilibrium of pre-colonial African societies. The analysis of their socio-political structures presented in it, allowing us to gauge the stabilizing factors in African society. Listen to that last sentence very carefully. The analysis of their socio-political structures presented in it, allowing us to gauge the stabilizing factors in African society. In other words, pre-colonially, there were certain stabilizing factors that allowed us to develop political, social, and economic structures among ourselves and among different people groups in Africa, or among Africans. The same is actually true of Africans in the diaspora in the context of enslavement. Those same stabilizing factors allowed Africans who were Igbo and Yoruba and Bakongo and Umbundu and Fon, yeah, and Mande, etc., to be able to socialize and organize and start rebellions or form so-called maroon communities. Yeah, these stabilizing factors acted as a cohesive agent towards the reformation of community and society where it had been broken up. And so Baba Sheikh Anta Diop is saying to us that through analyzing these stabilizing factors, we will find signposts for how they can be utilized in today's world for developing an African liberation agenda. Because those stabilizing factors, although negatively impacted, still exist implicitly within the culture of the people, just if we take the time to identify them, bring them to our consciousness, yes, and realize them within our institutions. That is the purpose of the book. It's not a history book. It's a book of African historical sociology. I want to know them thing there. All right. So we've gone through deconstruction. Now we have to deal with reconstruction. All right, let me just check in everybody, see how everybody I do. Yeah, how's it going, Kings and Queens? I hope you're following me. Yeah, we got Lady D in the building, Natty 2 Dread. You know what I mean? We got Gold Gossip, Sunjata, Ata Kakra, and Zambi, I like them name there, some serious name that. You know what I'm saying? We got Everything is Everything in the building. Yeah, man, share the link far and wide, Kings and Queens. We got some serious movements. Yeah, we're going to some serious movements. All right. Okay, we're going to go into some things. Yeah. All right. Okay. So that was what Sheikh Anta was dealing with. We're looking at the stabilizing factors. The stabilizing factors does not negate the fact that there is a Yoruba, an Igbo, yeah, an Ogoni, a Hausa, yeah, a Serer, a Luo, a Masai, a Dinka, a Nuer, an Indebele, a Xhosa, a Zulu, yeah, a Mbundu. Don't negate them thing there. It just means that there are stabilizing factors that have allowed us to form social order in the past that we can use to inform us today. And so we get to this idea now of reconstruction. The action or process of building or firming something again after it has been damaged or destroyed. Yeah, so our process, our organic indigenous process of analysis and tools of analysis have been robbed from us through the process of the Ma'afa, the invasion, conquest, enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonization of African people around the world. We are seeing ourselves, as Baba Kwesi says, through Western eyes. We have defined our history according to the periodization and the conceptualization of the colonizer. And so now we must reconstruct our own conceptualization, yes, if we are to properly liberate ourselves. And it is in this context that the African identity is birthed. Lord of mercy. Yes, it is in the context of reconstruction that the African identity is birthed as an act of rebellion against the colonizer, the enslaver, the European, etc., etc., etc. All right. So we say no. Liberation that we are dealing with. Make the ancestors be praised, you know. Jeez, and that me live for. Yeah. In the Al-Qaeda revivalist movement, the organization in which I was born and raised, yeah, we seek to define these terms like liberation. And so we're defining this now because the reconstruction, the need for reconstruction, takes place within the context of the desire, the need for liberation, and the process of actualizing liberation for our people. By liberation, we mean the acquisition of the power to be masters of our own destiny. This means to have control over every aspect of our lives with the capacity to define, defend, and develop ourselves, thus determining our own destiny. All right. Okay. Acquisition of power to define identity, defend, and develop ourselves, thus determining our own destiny. If we can't define ourselves for ourselves, we will have nothing to defend and nothing to develop. Yes? If you were here from the beginning, you would have heard from Mama Marimba Ani, who says, without clarity on this issue of identity, there is no liberation movement. There is no reason for us to be here. The reality is, however, you check it. Don't take my word for it. I'm putting it out there. Analyze it for yourself. Whenever you see an African, a black man or woman, denying the African identity, trying to negate the African identity, or neutralize the political application of the African identity, explicitly or implicitly, they do so out of a desire to emphasize some other identity over the African identity, to act politically in the interest of another identity other than the African identity, to realize and actualize themselves within another identity than the African identity. And I'm beginning to realize more and more and more that this idea of liberation, and more specifically, nation building, power acquisition, and as Mama Marimba Ani calls it, African world sovereignty, is a, if not the defining factor in these discussions and these debates. Let's go forward. By liberation, we do not simply mean independence, democracy, equality, integration, assimilation, reform, anti-apartheid, anti-colonialism, anti-slavery, abolition, civil rights, human rights, equal opportunities, justice, positive discrimination, humanism, humanitarianism, universalism, racial harmony, multiracialism, multiculturalism, cultural diversity, progress, socialism, or liberalism. We don't just mean any of these things. Yeah, these are what we refer to as euphemisms or weak terms designed to divert us, yeah, from the agenda of total liberation. Some of these things are good. Yeah, nothing wrong with independence. Independence is very good. Abolition, yeah, man. Abolition for Guan. Yeah, if you are a citizen of a country, you have a right to, you deserve your civil rights. And we should all have human rights. So, certainly. Yeah, humanitarianism, all good. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Racial harmony, everything bless. Yeah. Anti-colonialism and all good stuff. Yeah, some of this is all good stuff. All right, but none of it in and of itself is liberation. Yeah, and that's what's taking place at the moment. It's the diversion of our agenda from a liberation-oriented agenda to some other kind of agenda, to assimilationist agenda, to integrationist agenda. Yeah, usually within the context of European nation states and the identities associated with European nation states. The goal, the ultimate goal of an African liberation agenda is to achieve a world African sovereignty as defined by Mama Marimba Ani. She says, yeah, and I had the pleasure of being with her, well, in Ghana last year, but also in Atlanta in 2019, when she was hosting Abakosem Sumsum, yeah, the spirit, yeah, of African history, of the narratives of African history, a ritual, yeah, that she hosts and we all engage in Atlanta, and she says that liberation, we need to define it more. We need to be more descriptive and definitive in terms of what we mean and what we are aiming towards. And so she puts forward the idea of world African sovereignty. Notice the use of the term world African sovereignty, which means African sovereignty is not confined to any geopolitical landmass, but is inherent with the people and the social organization of the people. World African sovereignty. Without our cultural and historical connection, we are not a people. It is the basis of our sovereignty. Sovereignty she's defining in 5 components: our self-governance, our self-reliance, our self-determination, our economic independence, and our self-defense. All right? Not enough time to go into that, but that's just a basic breakdown of African world sovereignty, okay? Which should be easily understandable. Those of us, she says, yeah, in the beginning, the introduction, yeah, to the book, African Cosmology of the Bantu, sorry, not African Cosmology, Self-Healing Power, yeah, and Therapy by Baba Kimbwandende Kiabunseki Fukiyao. If you don't know, get to know, yeah? She says, those of us who have been committed to Pan-African liberation and self-determination have been studying, researching, and learning and teaching about the genius of ancient African civilization for many, many years. This has been the ritual process of constructing a paradigm for African-centered reconceptualization. We're dealing with reconstruction, right? Yeah, our approach is continually challenged by those who claim there is no African worldview. Yeah, Shakara. There is no African worldview to speak of. Yes, that each African society is fundamentally different. Yeah, and that the concrete substance of African culture has been destroyed and is now lost within such abstractions as worldview. Weltanschauung, yeah, as the Germans say. All right, that means worldview. All right. According to this ideological position, the African connection is non-existent, nothing but a figment of the African nationalist imagination. Yes, and I am a universal African nationalist, aren't I? So my concept of African cultural unity is merely a figment of my universal African nationalist imagination. Yeah, this is what we are being charged with. All right. Why am I emphasizing the word ideological? Because these people, some people who put forward this idea of there are thousands of different tribes on the African continent, they all speak different languages, and none of them get along, yeah, and they're completely different from each other. There's all that kind of stuff. This is not a position that is based upon study, research, scientific analysis, and so on and so forth. This is and to whatever extent it is still an ideological position. In other words, it is a position, yes, with inherent ideas in it that are designed to suit a particular interest and intentionality. And that interest is contrary to the African liberation intentionality and interest, which is why we emphasize different things. Yeah. But what happens is, because the African liberation ideologies are clearly ideological, those who challenge them have the smokescreen of academic objectivity, because the dominant society, which is a colonial and a neo-colonial society as far as African peoples are concerned, presents universalism and objectivity. And so those who reinforce the dictates of the dominant society, the neo-colonial society, are banking on the benefits of the supposed legitimacy of that system in defining the world according to their interest. I hope you don't understand when me I say. Because I don't have to say it again. All right. All right, let's move forward. Yeah, she says that was related to the African continent, yeah, specifically. This is taken from Let the Circle Be Unbroken. All right, another one of Mama Marimba Ani's books. And now she's talking about the African diaspora. She says our oppressors have emphasized the loss of language, yes, among us in the diaspora, the dress, living patterns, and other tangible and surface aspects of culture, just as they do in discussions of African culture on the continent. They emphasize differences in language and customs and even physique from one society to another. They do this with good reason. It is an emphasis that serves their objectives. Unified and organized African people are less easy to be dominated and controlled by a conglomerate of pan-European white nationalism. Until we learn that it serves our objectives to emphasize the similarities, the ties, the unifying principles, the common threads and themes that bind and identify us all as African, we will continue to be politically and ideologically confused. This is the affirmation. And the reality is, in order to emphasize the similarity, the ties, the unifying principles, the common threads, and the things that bind us all as African, we don't have to make anything up. We now have to fabricate nothing. Yes, because the things them did, the things them exist. But because we have not been existing in the consciousness of them things, yeah, we are not existing in a consciousness that allows us to apply them things. So we are currently existing in a context that where we are applying the neo-colonial concept of ourselves and what we are supposed to be. Lord have mercy. Some serious business that go on. We emphasize this through, again, the work of Sheikh Anta Diop. Yeah. We have said earlier that a people without a historical conscience is a population. Yeah. A people without a historical conscience is a population. The loss of national sovereignty and of historical conscience following a prolonged foreign occupation engenders stagnation and even sometimes regression, disintegration, and a partial return to barbarism. You remove the historical consciousness of a people, yes, you remove their capacity to situate themselves in time, politically and economically. And once a people cannot situate themselves politically and economically, they will regress. History is a clock that a people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. Baba John Henry Clark says so. Yes, it is also a compass that a people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. We don't know where we are going because we don't know historical consciousness defined by ourselves. All right. But then, what would we call African history? It's Baba Sheikh had to do it. And you notice, kings and queens, that a lot of the people that I'm quoting from, not exclusively, but a lot of the people I'm quoting from, are Africans from the continent. Africans from the continent who they tell us, do not assimilate these principles of African cultural unity, Pan-Africanism, African liberation, African unity. Africans from the continent are totally divorced from you African diasporans and your fantasies into African nationalism. All right, but we need to distinguish two levels. The immediate one of the local history, so dear and deeply lived, in which the African people segmented by diverse exterior forces, the principle of which is colonization, are shriveled up, finding themselves trapped and are vegetating today. He's basically saying that there are a number of social formations that we are operating within at the moment, that because of the fact that they are either given to us by the people that are trying to colonize us, or developed within the context of colonization and adopting many of the dictates of colonization, are not conducive to our development, our liberation. Yes? So we are shriveled up and trapped and are vegetating in those states today. And that is why there's always talk about why can't Africa develop and so on and so forth. And when there is African development, it is governed by the dictates of the IMF and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization and the United Nations, etc., etc., etc. A second level, more general and further off in time and space, and including the totality of our people, comprises the general history of Black Africa. When people say you could write a general history of Europe and nobody bats an eyelid, but if you write a general history of Africa, what is Africa? There is no such thing as African. Yeah? You write Asia, people understand, what that is. Yeah? You even got a thing called Eastern philosophy. Yeah, where between Shinto, Buddhism, Hindu, and all them something there, people recognize, different peoples, but there's a link, between the different philosophies that exist, the dominant ones that we know of in Asia. Recognize. When it comes to Africa, no, we can't have that at all. We can't even entertain the thought. That's a possibility. Why? Because the political objectives dictate that we must reinforce division. Because division negates the possibility of social cohesion. And negating the possibility of social cohesion negates the possibility of revolution and liberation agenda. Insofar as research permits, restoring it today from a, again, purely scientific approach, we don't have to make anything up. Each history is thus pinpointed and correctly situated in relation to general historical coordinates. Thus, all the continent's history is reevaluated according to a new unitary standard suited to revive and to cement on the basis of established fact all of the inert elements of the ancient historical mosaic. You will notice that in the last month or so, there's been a war, taking place in Europe, among Europeans. You will notice that you have not heard the term tribe or tribal warfare mentioned on the news anywhere. You will notice that in relation to the lack of the use of the word tribe or tribal warfare, that the idea that these are civilized people, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Europeans, this is not taking place in Rwanda, Congo. And so there's obviously a juxtaposition difference here between this tribal consciousness and this civilization consciousness. You will also notice NATO and Western civilization being trumpeted as a rallying cry for those who are against Russia. They don't deny that Russia is European. It just is not representing their specific political interest at the moment in time. And so they define their unified pan-European white nationalist interests as Western. And that Western identity is a geopolitical entity. Me say, the Western identity is a geopolitical entity that unites Britain, Spain, France, Portugal, Belgium, America, Australia, Canada, and anybody else, yeah, who wants to get with the program. But it is a geopolitical entity, a transnational and multinational geopolitical entity that unites them. And so because of that, they develop a historical narrative that justifies that political intention, which is why they teach Western philosophy in your school, your university, and your college. Because they're giving you a historical narrative that explains and justifies, yes, their social formation and their political intention. Adatagwan. And so put that in the African context. And Baba Sheikh Anthony Diop is saying that in a similar way, as African people, we have to fabricate. We have a historical context through which that informs that can inform our historical consciousness in this time, that will allow us to emphasize our relationship to each other throughout history, and we can use that understanding to develop ourselves from here on out. The subject today is the politics and power of African identity. My Lord. There's hardly a presentation that I do nowadays, without at least mentioning these two books. Yeah. Black Africa, the economic and cultural basis of a federated state, and the cultural unity of Black Africa were also written, both of them written by Baba Sheikh Anta Diop. Yeah. So we emphasize that these are texts, yeah, that people can look up and read and reference if you want a more deeper understanding of the concepts that are being elucidated right now. All right. But all of these, again, the economic and cultural basis of a federated state. Yes. So the culture and the economics of our people is the basis from which we can develop ourselves as a people, politically speaking. The politics and power of African identity. The negation of this politics and this power is designed to forward the political agenda of somebody else, and to subdue African power under the power of somebody else. A consideration of the pre-colonial African family, that of the state, the accompanying philosophical and moral concepts and the like, reveals a consistent cultural unity resulting from similar adaptations to the same material and physical conditions of life. In the book, he begins with the subject of language and talks about how we can develop, we don't just impose a language on people, how we go about the process, yeah, of developing unified African languages. And he starts with the idea that we had so-called lingua franca, yeah, trade languages and unified languages in pre-colonial African times, yeah, among ourselves. We had them also in the Caribbean, yeah. How do we communicate? It's not just the fact that we developed, the European languages are forced upon us. All of our patois, especially what they call deep patois, where the lexicon gets less and less European as you get deeper into the bush and where you're going, like the Kermanti or the maroon towns, yeah, and societies, yeah, all of these are amalgamations of various different languages as we learn to communicate with each other over different languages, because at the same time, many of us are already multilingual. Yeah, it's a rarity. Monolinguality is a rarity among Africans, yeah, on the continent from a long time. All right, so he begins in that context, yeah, talking about language, and the historical linkages between the languages and how we can develop those historical linkages into elevating certain languages that are best suited for mass communication for whatever reason, yeah, across different expanses, and then how we can magnify that to the continent as a whole. And in civilizational barbarism, he applies that also to the African diaspora, yes, and how we involve ourselves in this program. That's another presentation for another time. And I did quote from that section in a previous video that I did not too long ago, and I can't remember what the video is, so we'll get back to that. By the way, kings and queens, there are links in the description to this video to other related presentations to this. So a couple of mine and Faluka Adebisi and others, yeah? All right, let's go forward. We'll return to the good book. Blueprint for Black Power. Why do we emphasize African identity? What is the intentionality behind it? Yeah, you will notice that many people who are trying to negate African identity, they're not, all of the stuff that I've engaged so far, you know, in terms of what goes into it, the logic behind it, the political intentions, the cultural reconstruction, and so on and so forth. They're not going to engage any of that. Yeah, they're going to leave. And when you try to engage it, they're going to tell you that it's a distraction from the conversation. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Oh, jeez. All right. Yeah, they're not going to engage any of it. All right. But why would you engage the topic without engaging the logic behind it? Doesn't make any sense. All right, kings and queens. COINTELPRO is at work once again, so just bear with me. We emphasize the reclamation of African identity by African peoples and their construction of an African-centered consciousness because we recognize that it was and is the repression of these two factors that made the mental conquest and continuing domination of African people possible. The repression out of the consciousness of their original identity. Note that terminology, original identity and consciousness, is essentially what is referred to as alienation of the self. Of self-alienation. When the repression of African identity and consciousness, the refusal to learn of African history and culture are motivated by shame, guilt, anxiety, fear, embarrassment, yes, of being identified as African, most often induced by the political, economic machinations, and I'm going to add to that the cultural, religious machinations of dominant whites. When the African person uses these attitudes and feelings to reject his African identity and heritage, the identity and heritage being an objective fact, whether he accepts it or not, then we refer to that person as self-hating or self-alienated. Baba Kobe Kambon refers to it as cultural misorientation, yeah? And on another day, we're just going to do a whole presentation on cultural misorientation based upon the works of Baba Kobe Kambon, yeah? And let's go deep into the thing, the ancestor Kobe Kambon, yeah? And where am I dealing with? The general attitude is one of self-hatred. In being ignorant of, self-alienating, or in rejecting his objective historical cultural identity, self-hatred, the person is compelled to assume a new identity, albeit a false one, or suffer identity confusion, ambivalence, or lack of self-definition, usually characterized by a chronic search for purpose and meaning. Example: more and more, I'm engaging with Africans in the UK who say that we shouldn't identify as African anymore. What should we identify as? British Caribbean. The British being first. Yeah? The person is compelled to assume a new identity because it is seen as unviable to develop oneself as an African. So in order, to justifiably negate the African identity, one has to ignore or neutralize the justifications for an African identity in order to justify assuming another identity. That is what is at play. That is the program. In order to justify an allegiance to the British nation state, I have to make African identity inadequate. Yeah? And it was one time, self-hatred was obvious. It was easy to identify, and the people them knew. They expressed it. They expressed their self-hatred with pride. Yeah? Now, you got people trying to express self-hatred in the name of forwarding a progressive black agenda. We're not having it. Fire burn. Lightning, earthquake, and thunder. All right. Or be a forced one or suffer identity confusion, ambivalence, or lack of self-definition, usually characterized by chronic search for purpose and meaning. This is the idea now. So people say, some people now are saying, well, yeah, African can exist, but it's mainly it's a cultural identity because they don't understand what culture actually means, right? But if we're dealing with politics, African has no political utility. What they're actually saying is, they within themselves do not want to politically apply Africanness. That's what they. So instead of saying that, they want to negate the political application of Africanness in general. No, own your thing. Yeah. So you see me, I don't want to develop politically as an African. You know, I want to develop politically as a British Caribbean. Yeah. I want to develop politically as an American. I want to develop politically as a French man or woman. And adopting, adorning, and affirming this African identity prevents me, or retards my ability to be able to develop politically as a British Caribbean or an American or a French. Just say that and be done. We understand the thing properly. We know where I go. We know where I deal with. We know anyway. But at least it will be more clearer and you'll be being honest with yourself and us. Right. So I've dealt with Amos Wilson, 1990s. We're going to go all the way back here to 1854, right, with this word by one of the precursors, and key definers within the development of the ideological framework that becomes known as African nationalism, universal African nationalism, and Pan-Africanism in various forms, But Martin Delaney, in a speech entitled "The Political Destiny of the Colored Race on the American Continent," let it then be understood as a great principle of political economy. Once again, we're not dealing with politics or economy, we're dealing with political economy, that no people can be free who themselves do not constitute an essential part of the ruling element of the country in which they live, whether this element be founded upon a true or false, a just or an unjust basis. This position in the community is necessary to personal safety. The liberty of no man is secure who controls not his own political destiny. What is true of an individual is true of a family, and that which is true of a family is also true concerning a whole people. To suppose otherwise is that delusion, fireborn delusion, an illusion, which at once induces its victim through a period of long suffering, patiently to submit to every species of wrong, trusting against probability and hoping against all reasonable grounds of expectation for the granting of privileges and the enjoyment of rights which never will be attained. This delusion reveals the true secret of the power which holds the peace to in peaceable subjection all the oppressed in every part of the world. Yeah, we are held in peaceable subjection to Britain and America. In Britain and America, and also in Africa and the Caribbean, based upon this desire to be accepted and assimilated into the institutions and by the nations that govern this neo-colonial reality that we are in at the moment. Mosiah. A people to be free must necessarily be their own rulers. But we're delving into, in the reconstruction process now, the logic behind the affirmation of an African identity. What were the people that affirmed an African identity dealing with? What problems were they trying to solve? And why was an African identity central to the solving of those problems? A people to be free must necessarily be their own rulers. That is, each individual must in himself embody the essential ingredient, so to speak, of the sovereign principle which composes the true basis of his liberty. What is this principle? This principle, when not exercised by himself, may at his pleasure be delegated to another, his true representative. Listen. Then, to be successful, our attention must be turned in the direction towards those places where the black and colored man comprise by population and constitute by necessity of the numbers the ruling element of the body politic, and where, when occasion shall require it, the issue can be made and maintained on this basis. He's talking about nationhood. When our political enclosure and national edifice can be reared, established, walled, and proudly defended on this great principle, elementary principle of what? Original identity. So we're talking about affirming an original identity, yes, that allows us to develop ourselves as a nation, and from identifying ourselves as a nation to develop nationhood institutions as a result of that. We African people, why are we African people? Because we come from some people with the name Yoruba and Igbo and Ashanti or Akan Confederation. Yeah, we come from some people with the name Bakongo and Mbundu. Yeah, we come from some people who are named Fun, yeah, and Mande, yeah, and all of these people amalgamate in the African diaspora in the Americas, and so we seek now and have developed social organization as a result, and we're seeking to develop an identity that gives expression, yes, to that social organization, and we draw inspiration from the land from which we come as a means for developing the name for that expression, that identification. African. Now, bearing in mind that in this document, what he's advocating for is the mass migrations of Africans in what is then now the United States of America to places like Brazil and Haiti. Why? Because those are, in particular Haiti, because of the revolution in Haiti, yes, but because these are places whereby we are the majority, and therefore we have a better chance of establishing and defending, yes, the institutions of our nationhood. Although Martin Delaney did go to Africa, yes, not only did he go to Africa, but he, along with Robert Campbell, who was from the Caribbean, Jamaica, what's it called? Signed a treaty with a group of Yoruba chiefs among the subgroup called the Egba. Yeah, that and it's not in this presentation because it's in another presentation which is in the description called "What's Wrong with Being African." Yeah, and I go into that history and I read from the treaty. Yeah, whereby they were advocating for members of the African race in the Americas to be able to settle in accord among the Egba people. He done this later on in his life, so that was that too. But the point is that African nationhood was not confined to the African continent. African nationhood was to be developed among African people wherever we were on the planet Earth. The peoplehood, the unique history of those people, and the culture of those people is what was key in this dynamic. I hope you understand what me I say. All right. Upon this solid foundation rests the fabric of every substantial political structure in the world, which cannot exist without it. And so soon as a people or nation lose their original identity, just so soon must that nation of people become extinct. We want to become extinct in Britishness. We want to become extinct in Frenchness. We want to become extinct in Americanness. We want to become extinct in human universalism, which is also defined by white nationalist pan-Europeanism. Because the definition of human that you're using is defined by them. Individualism. Yeah. Once we lose that, we become extinct. All right. And just mere tools. Yeah. Of antagonistic colonial entities and institutions. Powerful though they may have been, they must fall, because the nucleus which heretofore held them together, becoming extinct, there being no longer the center of attraction or basis of union of the parts. A dissolution must naturally ensue as a result of the neutrality of the basis of adhesion among the particles of matter. Yeah, so the African identity seeks to provide a center of attraction. It doesn't mean that all of the unitary parts are homogeneous and do the same thing all at the same time, all of the time. It just means that there is a center of attraction, a basis for a union of parts. A dissolution, if you don't have that, must naturally ensue as the result of the neutrality. So the idea now, yeah, is to say, well, yeah, like, whereas, you know, like American identity can work on many different levels. British identity can work on many different levels: political, cultural, economic, philosophical, theoretical, ideological, scientific, so on and so forth. All these European identities, they work on multiple. But the African identity, for those who want to neutralize it, for those who want to rob it of its agency, which it already has historically, as you can see, I'm going through, yes, the historical examples. For those who want to neutralize it, is to negate it as a political force, to negate its political potentiality, to even rob even the concept of the possibility of the fact that it can be politically affirmed. Why? Because the agenda is to neutralize African identity for the sake of activating British Caribbeanness, Americanness, Frenchness, etc., etc., etc. Normally, I look to wrap up now, you know, but I'm going to go forward, yeah? Follow me. I hope you're following me, kings and queens. Yeah? I'm going through examples of definers within the African identity context and what they were using the African identity to develop. We've gone from Martin Delaney now to Baba Edward Wilmot Blyden. These are all 1800s, yeah? And Baba Edward Wilmot Blyden, this is Edward Wilmot Blyden speaking in Sierra Leone, yes? In the year 1893, that's it there, 1893, all right? He says, he's speaking to a group of young men, yeah, a literary association of young men in Sierra Leone. He says, now, there is a responsibility which our personality, which our membership in the race involves. It is sad to think that some Africans, yeah, especially among those who have enjoyed the advantages of foreign training, who are blind enough to the radical fact of humanity as to say, let us do away with the sentiment of race. Let us do away with our African personality. and be lost, if possible, in another race. I'm going to add to that another identity. Let's lose ourselves in Britishness and get rid of our African personality. The duty of every man, of every race, is to contend for its individuality, to keep the development, to keep and develop it. Never mind teaching of those who tell you to abandon that which you cannot abandon. Yeah, never mind the teaching of those who tell you to abandon that which you cannot abandon. I could go more into Baba Edward Blyden because he has a lot of good works, some contradictions too. Yeah, all of our great ancestors have their virtues and their mishaps, their contradictions, and you know, and all of the above kings and queens. Yeah, we understand that, but we're looking at this idea of African identity and African personality. Yeah. Now, this is about my name of Mojola Agbebi. Yeah. He is Yoruba. Well, he's Yoruba. And his father is something else. I can't remember what it is, but his mother's Yoruba anyway. All right. He was born with the name David Vincent Brown. Yeah, because his parents converted to Christianity, and they gave him a good Christian name. All right, as a result. All right, but he grows up, comes into an African consciousness. Yeah, in Nigeria, his father used to minister between Nigeria, what later became known as Nigeria, because there was no Nigeria at this point, yeah, and what was then Sierra Leone, because there was a Sierra Leone at this point, yeah, and he grows up, comes into an African consciousness, and rejects his European name, or the label, that the European label that his parents gave him, and reclaims the name and affirms the name Mojola Agbebi. Yeah, he is raised to be a minister, and him come out at the Baptist church as defined by the colonizers who came to the land. Yeah, in 1888, he founds the Native Baptist Church. And native in West Africa and various parts of Africa actually is just a synonym for African. Whenever you see native, especially in this era, 1800s, early 1900s, when they say native, they're talking about the indigenous African peoples. And they're using it as a collective term to refer to the different groups of African people in that context. And then the Afrikan Baptist Union of West Africa. Why do you call it the African Baptist Union of West? Why not just the Baptist Union of West? Because it's not just geographical. He's affirming the identity. The first African is about the identity of the people, and the second African is about West Africa. Yeah, and in the opening of the speech, yeah, of the commencement of the African Baptist Union of West Africa, he promoted a church governed by Africans, worked by Africans, supported by Africans, minus the trammels, complexions, and dominations of a foreign and alien race. Yeah, this idea of African identity was present in the African diaspora and on the African continent before almost all of the 54 nations that we see on the African continent today. African identity and the concept of even African nationality. I believe the first person to use the term African nationality was Afrikanus Horton, yeah, who was from Sierra Leone. Yeah. What's it called? That was in the late 1800s. Existed before there was a Gold Coast, and before there was a Nigeria, and before there was an Ivory Coast, and before there was a Kenya, and before there was a Congo as currently constituted. Yes, and before there was an Angola, and before there was a South Africa, and before there was a Namibia. You get my point. So why is it then that the Ghanaian identity, the Nigerian identity, the Jamaican identity, the Trinidadian identity, the St. Lucian identity, the South African identity, the Kenyan identity is more legitimate than the African identity? Smuddy, explain that to me. And we can take the African identity, at least in written form, back to the mid 1700s. Or let's say the last quarter of the 1700s, as far as writing is concerned. Yeah. So when you see it in written form, you know, say it must have did exist before that. Okay. We're nearly there, Kings and Queens. We're nearly there. Yeah, you know, so I and I, as a Gaviite, can do a presentation like this and don't draw from the wisdom, yes, of the prophet himself, the supreme visionary, the preeminent organizer of our people's liberation history, the prophet Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Yes, in the Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, he says, the program to be explained in a few words is that of universal, industrial, educational, religious, social, and political freedom. The stranger will ask, why would you want political freedom when Victoria of England gave it to you? Yeah, we can be British, right? And many of us were subjects of Britain at that time. And so we saw our freedom and our liberation as given to us by Britain and actualized, realized through the affirmation of the British identity, British statehood, British nationhood, British nationality. I am a subject of queen and country. Yes, we could absorb ourselves into that and use that as the foundation of our political agency as the system of colonialism intended for us to do. The stranger will ask, why should you want political freedom when Victoria of England gave it to you 84 years ago and Lincoln of America 57 years ago? I am tempted to answer for you and say that the present-day Negro does not believe in hypocrisy and camouflage. He believes in truth, in honesty, in justice. The freedom that Lincoln gave us means that half of the population of our race in America is still voteless and voiceless. All of the population of the race in America is deprived of that higher right of citizenship that makes each and everyone an equal under the Constitution. Yeah, I spoke at the beginning about people trying to reduce politics to civics. Yeah, the broader concept of politics in terms of nation building, nation maintenance, and power acquisition to just how you relate to the political institutions of the society in which you live. Yeah? And that then one do. So they can affirm Britishness and Americanness and all them something there. These are the things that the Universal Negro Improvement Association questions. These are the things that we are here to discuss at our present convention. Whether we will accept civilization as it is, or put it under a rigid examination to make it what it ought to be as far as our race is concerned. We don't want to be imitations of the European. We want to be affirmations of our own African selves. Yeah? And this is the mission of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. The prophet says so. Not only are we not politically and religiously free, as I have aforesaid, but socially we are not free. Economically we are not free. And we of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, who have called you together in this mighty convention, this which was delivered at the convention, I believe it was the second convention in 1921, but if not that one, the third one in 1922. Yeah, believe that if you must be free, you yourselves must strike the blow. Lincoln can't free you. Victoria of England can't free you. If Negroes must be free, then 400 million of us must organize the world over and strike the blow for our freedom, the freedom we desire. Yeah. So the political application of Africanness, whether you want to adopt it or not, whether you are impassioned and convicted by it or not, the political application of Africanness is in the application of power acquisition, nation building, and nation management. It means, therefore, that identifying as an African politically gives you a mission, and your mission is to organize and build and develop institutions for the purpose of forwarding an African liberation agenda towards achieving world African sovereignty and nationhood. And I believe that this is the mission that enough people are run from. It's easier. Yeah, it's easier to absorb oneself into the identity of colonizers than it is to affirm your own African independence and sovereignty and fight for it. It's easier to do that. We just have to be honest about the thing. Couple more examples. Yeah, I hope ones are following the train right now. We're going to go back to the African continent. Yeah. So we went from Baba Martin Delaney to Baba Edward Wilmot Blyden to the Prophet Marcus Mosiah Garvey. We're going to go to the examples of the Asaja for Kwame Nkrumah and Baba Patrice Lumumba. Yeah. Now, and little as it's known, the two of them signed a secret agreement, yeah, for the union of African states. The Ghana, Guinea, Mali union was already in train at this point, yeah, between Ghana, Guinea, and Mali. And so, because of the strategic importance of Congo and the politics that were apparent at the time, Baba Nkrumah and Lumumba signed this agreement secretly, yeah. And the agreement is published in Africa Must Unite by Asaja for Kwame Nkrumah. And I believe it's also in Crisis in the Congo as well. The president of the of the Republic of Ghana, and the prime minister of the Republic of the Congo, having given serious thought to the idea of what? African unity, and because Africans on the continent, you don't believe in unifying Africans. And with the approval of the governments and the peoples of their respective states, have decided to establish among themselves a union of African states. And agreed as follows, that the union will have a republican constitution and within a federal framework, that the federal government will be responsible for foreign affairs, defense and common currency, economic planning and development, that there will be no customs barriers between any parts of the federation, that there will be a federal parliament and a federal head of state, that the capital of the union will be in Leopoldville, which is in the Congo. Yeah. That any state of territory in Africa is free to join the union, and that the above union presupposes Ghana's abandonment of the Commonwealth. So in this, the affirmation of the African nationhood concept and its institutionalization within a federal framework requires us to reject, yes, our subordination to frameworks and institutions that are governed by colonizers and neocolonizers. Yeah. For the sake of time, we're going to move on, except to say that this was signed in August of the year 1960. The following year, Baba Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. Yeah. The following year, Baba Patrice Lumumba, in fact, months later, Baba Patrice Lumumba was assassinated in January of 1961. Yeah. And the Asaja for Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown, yeah, in a America, Britain, and Belgian and French orchestrated coup. In, well, I should say more American and British. Yeah, the Belgians and the French were more involved in Baba Patrice Lumumba. However, because of the nature of West Africa at the time, the French were definitely involved as it regards to Nkrumah. But in 1966, Nkrumah was overthrown in a coup. All right, just as a historical talking point. But we know, yeah, that Nkrumah said these immortal words on the day of independence in Ghana, 1957, that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. Independence of Ghana, liberation of the African continent. There is an African consciousness being developed here as well, or should I say affirmed here as well. And in the book Conscientism, he speaks quite extensively about the African personality, as Baba Edward Wilmot Blyden did before him. Yeah. Now, we often hear the words of Baba Kwame Nkrumah. I want to focus today, though, a bit more on the words of Papa Patrice Lumumba. Yeah, and there's a number of quotes. I'm going to go through all of them. All right, it says Africa will tell the West that today it desires the rehabilitation of Africa, a return to the roots, a revalorization of moral values. The African personality must be expressed. That is the meaning of our policy of positive neutrality. Africa will have no blocks as you have in Europe. Instead, there will be active African solidarity. The Commonwealth regime, which is just a disguise for continuing the colonial regime, is going to fall soon. You see, gentlemen, they are trying to distort our focus when they call our governments a communist government in the pay of the Soviet Union, or say that Lumumba is a communist and anti-white. Lumumba is an African. Let's move on. He says in another speech, the government of Congo is a nationalist government that does not want imported ideologies, but which demands nothing but the total, complete liberation of the Congo. We have absolutely no intention of letting ourselves be guided by any foreign ideologies whatsoever. We have our own ideology, a strong, noble ideology, which is the affirmation of the African personality. The Congo's independence is a decisive step towards the liberation of the whole African continent. Our government, a government of national and popular unity, will serve its country. I call on all Congolese citizens, men, women. So you remember, he's got the citizenry aspect all there, yeah? Congolese citizens, men, women, and children, to set themselves resolutely to the task of creating a national economy and ensuring our economic independence, which we still haven't achieved in Africa and the Caribbean today. Eternal glory to the fighters of national liberation. Long live independence and African unity. Long live the independent and sovereign Congo. On the cultural plane, the new African states, by the way, the references for these quotations are here. I'm not quoting them for the sake of time. All right, let's go into the words. Yeah. The new African states must make a serious effort to further African culture. African culture. We have a culture all our own, unparalleled moral and artistic values, an art of living and patterns of life that are ours. Most times when we talk about African culture, we talk about food, dance, maybe we talk about languages. Yeah, we talk about garms, yeah, clothes, yeah. We discuss the superficialities associated with culture. All right. And I'll go into this more in a presentation that I delivered called revolutionary economics and culture in action. Yeah, the link is in the description to this video, and I also go into that in my Kimoyo series. Yeah, so do check that playlist if you want more on this culture element. All right. Well, he's talking here about art of living and patterns of life as a part of African culture. All these African splendors must be jealously preserved and developed. All these what? African splendors must be jealously preserved and developed. We will borrow from Western civilization what is good and beautiful and reject what is not suitable for us. All self-determined, self-defining, and self-affirming people do that. They learn from their environment. Yeah, it is not a diminishment of the self to learn from other people. It's a diminishment of the self to diminish the self in trying to become other people. Yeah, and quite as it's kept, kings and queens, the philosophy, the civilizations of Europe, yeah, borrowed heavily from other civilizations, including African ones. But shh, don't tell nobody. All right. Okay. The amalgam of African and European civilization will give Africa a civilization of a new type, an authentic civilization corresponding to African realities, not imitating European realities, but corresponding to African realities. In fact, the African unity so ardently desired by all those who are concerned about the future of this continent will be possible and will be attained only if those engaged in politics and the leaders of our respective countries demonstrate a spirit of solidarity, concord, and fraternal collaboration in the pursuit of the common goals of our peoples. That is why the union of all patriots is indispensable. Notice the use of the term patriots. He is not just referring to the Congo, especially during this period of struggle and liberation. The aspirations of colonizers and enslaved peoples are everywhere the same. Their lot too is the same. Moreover, the aims pursued by nationalist movements in any African territory are also the same. The common goal is the liberation of Africa from the colonist yoke. Since our objectives are the same, we will attain them more easily and more rapidly through union than through division. These divisions, which the colonial powers have always exploited the better to dominate us, have played an important role and are still playing an important role in the suicide of Africa. How can we extricate ourselves from this impasse? How do we extricate ourselves? In my view, there is only one way: bringing all Africans together in popular movements or unified parties. All tendencies can coexist within these parties, bringing all nationals together, and each will have its say both in the discussion of problems facing the country and in the conduct of public affairs. Yeah, I've just read through all that just so you can understand where the ancestor was coming from. Yeah, in the affirmation of African identity, African personality, and African culture. And we're going to do the same now with the words of Baba Omowale, Malcolm X. And then we're going to play a few more videos, and then we're done the presentation for this evening.
Most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States. But they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba and those in Brazil and those in Venezuela and those throughout the Caribbean and Haiti and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists and to colonialism as it exists in the West. And one of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. One of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride. And as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together. And your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat. More threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat.
All right, so just to situate us in the reasoning, yeah, we're dealing with reconstruction. We began with the idea of reconstructing and developing an analysis of our history, in particular our pre-colonial history. We touched on how we organized during the colonial process and the affirmation of an African identity within that context as a tool of liberation and nation building. Now we are just emphasizing the ways in which Africans have developed that throughout time. Yeah, particularly we are attacking this fallacy that the identity of African has no political application in today's world. And I'm saying categorically that statement is a reflection of a person's decision, yeah, whether they want to affirm the political agency of Africanness or not. But whether they do or not, the political agency of Africanness exists because our ancestors have set the template, and there are many among us today who are forwarding that template, against the tide of dominant white supremacist, white nationalist, pan-European institutions, national and multinational and transnational. I'm soon done, kings and queens. I'm soon done. Yeah. If you're in the UK, I know it's late. You know what I'm saying?
Most people, when
right?
we say
we're nearly there. All right. So this is a snippet of Malcolm X speaking when he returned from Cairo. I'm not going to read it for the sake of time. We're just going to go on to the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And deal with this idea of the charter and the aims and objectives and the idea of establishment. He says, upon this establishment, the Afro-American people will launch a cultural revolution. Remember, identity is an expression of culture, which will provide the means for restoring our identity, that we might rejoin our brothers and sisters on the African continent, culturally, psychologically, economically, and share with them the sweet fruits of freedom from oppression and the independence of racist government. General terminologies in the same document says Afro-Americans must reanalyze, deconstruct, and particularly question our own use of this term. The term is referring to as Negro. Keeping in mind all of the facts in light of the historical meanings and current implications, all intelligent and informed Afro-Americans and Africans continue to reject its use in the noun form as well as the proper adjective. Its usage shall continue to be considered as unintelligent and objectionable or deliberately offensive, whether in speech or in writing. We accept the use of Afro-American, African, and Black man in reference to persons of African heritage. To every other part of mankind goes this measure of just respect. We do not desire more, and we shall not accept less. We are just affirming and emphasizing the purpose, the political purpose behind the affirmation of an African identity, and what it was designed to serve. All right. We go now to Baba. We've gone from the 1960s now to the 1980s. This is going to be Baba Maurice Bishop, then Prime Minister of Revolutionary Grenada, speaking in the United States of America in June of 1983, months before he was assassinated in October of 1983. Listen to what he says very carefully about the American fear of an African solidarity built upon the recognition and the institutionalization, the realization of an African identity.
They give all kinds of reasons and excuses, some of them credible, some utter rubbish. There's an interesting one that we saw very recently in a secret report of the State Department. I want to tell you about that one, so you can reflect on that one. That secret report made this point, that Grenada is different to Cuba and Nicaragua. And the Grenada Revolution is in one sense even worse, I'm using their language, than the Cuban and Nicaraguan revolutions, because the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada speaks English and therefore can communicate directly to the people of the United States. I can see from your applause, sisters and brothers, that you agree with the report. But I want to tell you what that same report also said. And said that also made us very dangerous. And that is that the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada are predominantly Black. They said that 95% of our population is Black, and they had a correct statistic. And if we have 95% of predominantly African origin our country, then we can have a dangerous appeal to 30 million black people in the United States. Now, that aspect of the report clearly is one of the most sensible ones.
That should speak for itself. All I'm going to say is, think about the fact that when we begin, if this is the interest, if the African identity and the realization of the African identity is considered a threat to the interests of America as a geopolitical entity, yeah, it stands to reason that brothers and sisters among African people who affirm the American identity, especially as affirming the American identity over and above their Africanness, especially affirming the political agency and application of the American identity over and above Africanness, will indeed seek to attack, negate, and neutralize the African identity and its power potential, because their allegiances define their activities. Their allegiances make such an endeavor necessary. Let's move forward.
They give.
This is, so we're right up to date now. This is the same conference that I met Dr. Foluke Adebisi. This elder, Nana Nketsia the Fifth, yeah, who is I'm forgetting his official Hene title. Hene is referring to kingship, yeah, in among the Akan. I'm forgetting his specific title, something Hene. Forgive me, yeah, but he's a chief, all right. And he spoke at this conference, Re-engaging Pan-Africanism. Yeah, I'll play it and explain it afterwards.
It's always, I've seen some ladies here with the African, you know, the Africans, their statement is beautiful. The fashion statements, it manifests a sentiment. And even if the leadership are gone, there's a mass that is going on that people feel, you know. One, Pan-Africanism is a religion. It is a faith. It's a conviction. It's a realization. It's a consciousness of being African. It makes you ground yourself in African culture. And let me tell you, those who come and tell you that we have a multiplicity of culture, you're only dealing with, divisions. That is why it's always been important in the diaspora. When you move out, you see the shared, the roots of the culture.
Yes,
that we all are right out of one roots. I've lived in several areas in Africa. I can remember that when I was in Eastern Nigeria, somewhere southeastern Nigeria, I was studying that people refer to them as fellows, as stupid as you can imagine. They refer to them as that. The more I learned about this non-centralized society, the more I understood what they refer to as a centralized society. We were the same. We share almost our attitude to the Ngozi in South Africa, to to the Nanas and so on. It is the same or very similar. If you want to make differences, you can find them. If you decide to look for them, you will find them.
Hey.
If you decide to look for unity, you will find them. A Pan-Africanist sees the unity, and that unity overrides the petty cultural embroideries, which are referred to as the differences.
Mm.
It is an ascension and a vow of unity, shared culture, anti-colonial, anti-oppressive, self-determination, self-reliance, and then when it talks about independence, the word independence, I always break it down to indigenous dependence. You are dependent on your own indigenous original thoughts. As soon as you go and you put your mind on somebody else's thoughts and so on, you become dependent. So you can't talk about being dependent, being independent when your thoughts are foreign. So this is something you need to. It's equalitarian, exudes self-confidence with an unwritten ideology that Africans, you here, must take seriously in politics, in economics, in social organization, etc. And the philosophy the South Africans have the word for its word, Ubuntu. In practicing Ubuntu, the African becomes a living testament of the African personality. Pan-Africanism must be perceived not from the produce of European thought structures. It is a move away from the hegemonic Western discourse. It does not need European approval for its authenticity.
It does not need European approval for its authenticity. We don't have to ask nobody. Yeah. Like, look how they recognize 54 countries. We don't have to ask them whether we're allowed to affirm an African identity and develop it in political and economic institutions. What kind of nonsense is that? But again, I'm playing this. This is an African from the continent, from Ghana, yeah, speaking what is now today called Ghana, because in the speech he says that he doesn't come from Ghana. He comes from a space that is referred to as Ghana or something like that. But it's an interesting speech, and you can find a link to it in the description to the video. But he's discussing the indigenous African chieftaincies, yeah, king and queenship systems, and so on and so forth, as institutions for forwarding a Pan-African agenda. Yeah. And so that's kind of what he's discussing here. All right. So you can hear that he's saying, if you want to find differences, you'll find them. Yeah. Differences do exist. It's a reality. But if you want to find similarities, then you'll find those also. Yeah. And we can use them as a basis for developing ourselves. A couple more things.
But the other powerful challenge, which needs to manifest is this question of a federation of African states. I mean, one of the reservations that one has is that the states as we have them today on the continent especially are essentially neo-colonial states. And so a federation of neo-colonial states would be one horrible disaster if, they're run by neo-colonialists. But then a federation of people to people. And it was something that was discussed, one of the issues we're discussing yesterday, with some of the comrades and colleagues, that were around a table with. This question of people to people solidarity, so that the issue of African federations of us, going into a union, it's not just a government thing. It's not state to state, but it's people to people. And so one of the things that, we must push, all of us, is this fundamental question of the global nature of our African identities. That we stop, to see ourselves as Nigerians and Gabonese and, Ghanaians and Congolese and all these other nonsensical identities that we have. But not just that we talk about them like we're talking now, but that it's actually, embedded in our spirits, in our psyche, and in our approach to our work. Because those of you, who are on the continent know that we face, this crisis of religion, this crisis of ethnicism that is tearing us apart. And the only solution to that is going to, to start to address things and see things as a global body. And that when we speak of a federation of African states, we're not just referring to us on the continent, but that we are coming to the table with all of our power. And our power means the millions of Africans in the diaspora. That there's that clarity of understanding. So it's not something we just talk about or we preach about, but that we actually begin to implement in whatever, ways, we're working, whatever little areas of work, that we engage in.
So I get it, yeah. Not everybody is imbued with that kind of vision, right? Not everybody is impassioned with that kind of vision. I'm a Gaviat, yeah. So I go to sleep and wake up envisioning African liberation. You know, I'm using the word vision. I was watching and I had the opportunity to discuss Brother Assad Imhotep's presentation a couple of days ago on whether African Americans have a culture, their own culture, sorry. And he kept quoting from this film. You gotta have vision, right? And it was beautiful. We refer to Marcus Bazan Garvey as a supreme visionary, right? And vision is one of my favorite words in the English language, and is, you know, it's one of the frequently used words, yeah, that, you know, we use as Garveyites because of the vision of African redemption, yeah. And the reality is that not every African is imbued in passion with that vision, yeah. That's part of the reality of the now. All right, you know what I'm saying? My primary contention here is, all right, if that's not you, then own that. Yeah, and say, listen, I'm not on the political application of African identity. Yeah, don't negate the application of political identity. Just say that you're not on this thing. Yeah, man can deal with that. You know, see it. Man can deal with that.
But the other.
All right, we're gonna hear from Auntie Afrikan again. She's saying similar things here, but yeah, there's a reason why I put both of them in here. That was her speaking in Munich. It's about a decade ago, and this is her speaking in London, actually at the premises of the Al-Qaeda Revivalist movement, 2016, I believe.
And the other thing that we've got to realize that Africa is our homeland. We've actually got to understand that here, because sometimes I hear some people diaspora say things like, "Oh, and you see that a lot on social media. Those continentals, you know, they don't like us." Or they say we're not Africans. Imagine you or any of the sisters, somebody comes to you and says, "You're not a woman." How would you respond to them? Tell me, think about it. So you're not a woman. You're crazy. Absolutely. They'd either have to be crazy on medication or something, or be bipolar or both. But then somebody comes up to you and tells you you're not an African, and you become offended. You must be crazy.
That's right. That's right.
You need to understand that. And so there must be that deep understanding, because even people on the continent do not know our history. That's right. They've kept the history away from us the same way it's been kept away from Africans in the diaspora. So don't think people on the continent know all this history. And no, the enemy is the same.
That's right. That's right.
I could play the rest. I'm not going to for the sake of time, but you can watch that whole video. There's two actually. So the whole like section of this speech is called "Weapons for Liberation" on this channel, and also this the remainder of this clip is called "You Are Not an African." Yeah, but yeah, so there's a dynamic that comes up here, unfortunately, all right, whereby you have brothers and sisters who take statements from individuals who are from the continent, yeah, as the definitive idea of what it means to be an African and what an African identity is and whether it exists or not, and so on and so forth. And there is some validity to that in some circumstances. Like if you want perspectives from Africans from the diaspora, yeah, there are some things that we will be able to provide that African from the continent wouldn't be, and vice versa. All right, but we shouldn't take it for granted, especially what I presented from Baba Kwesi Pra, from Baba Sheikh Anta Diop, from Mama Faluke at ABC at the beginning in the deconstruction element of this presentation. We should not take it for granted that the concepts of self, yeah, that are popularly espoused from Africans on the continent, yeah, are in fact centered in our organic and indigenous reality and consciousness. Yeah, we've all been through these same processes, so we shouldn't assume that Africans on the continent, just because they're born on the continent or from family on the continent, have a better grasp of history, yeah, and nationhood and African nationhood than we do. It's a silly assumption to make. All right, and that's not so that there are not things that we will learn more from Africans on the continent than anywhere else. That's just a fact. Yeah, that knowledge exchange between Africans in the continent and the diaspora is a necessary part of the process also. I'm just simply saying that we shouldn't make that assumption. And and when that assumption is weaponized, yeah, in a conversation, yeah, I just find it very interesting. But let's move on. All right, so this is just a breakdown from a book entitled Tribes, how global. Sorry, let me just get the full title for you. How race, religion and identity determine success in the new global economy, written by a European called Joel Kotkin. Yeah, basically in the book he analyzes 5 groups of people: Jews, Chinese, Japanese, Americans. Let me just clarify with the table of contents. Yeah, India. Yeah, and how they've developed along quote unquote tribal lines. Yeah, he's kind of breaking the mold by using that terminology in this context, right? In terms of dominating world politics and economics. Yeah, and so he's identified 3 primary characteristics: strong identity, global network, and technical knowledge. I'm not going to read the breakdowns for the sake of time, but you can come back and pause if you want to. The point that's being made here, however, is that we as African people already have a global network because of the fact that we are situated around the world. So if we had wanted to, if we had developed a strong sense of unified identity, then we'll be able to take advantage of that global network, yeah, for the sake of acquiring technological knowledge, yeah, and manifesting that in terms of institution and nation building. All right, that's the point of this here. This slide is just a list of African organizations that use the term African in the organization, just to affirm that as far as politically and culturally and economically, Africans have affirmed an African identity in our institution building processes over hundreds of years. Yeah, and this does not exhaust the list. It's just an example of the number of different organizations that I came up with off the top of my head. Yeah, literally at the time that I put together the presentation. All right, and there's more. Yeah, hundreds more. But you can see the term African highlighted here for every different organization that uses it, or synonyms for African like our Kebalan. All right, and so on. Okay, so we're affirming again that African has been used politically and is being used politically. Yeah, within today's world. Yeah, the only deciding factor in its effectiveness is the number of Africans who are impassioned by this ideal. That's it. That is the only variable. All right, so we end with the principles of universal African nationalism. That should be the heading of this slide, so apologies. Yeah, but again, race first, self-reliance, African spiritual orthodoxy, which speaks to our spiritual and cultural focus, and nationhood are the principles of universal African nationalism, but it's built upon the foundation of race first, which is African identity. Okay. The illiterate Papagavi says, and shallow-minded Negro who can see no further than his nose is now the greatest stumbling block in the way of the race. He tells us that we must be satisfied with our condition, that we must not think of building up a nation of our own. Yeah, we must go to the ballot and vote. Yeah, we must only engage politics as a civic duty within a nation state that we have a passport for. Yeah, and if you don't have an African passport, then you cannot affirm an African identity or an African political agenda, because the international law does not grant you the right to affirm an African identity because you don't have an African passport. In fact, there's not a thing as an African passport. This is the level of reasoning that we're engaged in because we lack vision. Yeah, we just lack vision. That's all it is. Yeah, that we must not think of building up a nation of our own, that we must not seek to organize ourselves racially, but that we must depend upon the good feeling of the other fellow for the solution of the problem that now confronts us. We must only seek solutions within the confines of the dictates and the institutions of colonizers, of Europeans, of the United Nations, of Britain, of France, of America, yeah, of Canada, of Australia. etc., etc., etc. That these are the only viable avenues for us to pursue political development. This is a dangerous policy, and it is my duty to warn the 400 million Negroes of the world against this kind of leadership. A leadership that will try to make Negroes believe that all will be well without their taking upon themselves the task of bettering their condition politically, industrially, and educationally, and otherwise. The time has come for those of us who have the vision of the future to inspire our people to closer kinship. The time has come for us who have the vision of the future to inspire our people to closer kinship, to closer love of self, because it is only through this appreciation of self will we be able to rise to that higher life that will make us not an extinct race in the future, but a race of men fit to survive. And so we crystallize the philosophy of universal African nationalism within the concept of Black nationalist Pan-Africanism as defined within the Al-Qaeda revivalist movement. Nationalism, African people building and maintaining autonomous nations and communities with institutions designed to promote and preserve and protect African lives by any means necessary. Nationalism is founded upon one fundamental principle and 7 essential principles. The fundamental principle is race first, which is race awareness and cultural emancipation first, i.e. putting the survival and prosperity of our people and culture before all other considerations. This being the only logical and viable response to the worldwide racial oppression and genocide facing us as a people. And then we have the essential principles of nationalism, which are proud heritage, proud governance, self-reliance, separatism. Those are the first 4. If you want to read the breakdowns, come back to the video, pause, and you'll be able to do so. Yeah, so we've got, once again, proud heritage, self-governance, self-reliance, separatism, self-defense, land acquisition, and repatriation. Pan-Africanism, because we're dealing with Black nationalist Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is a total liberation, reunification of Africa and all African people, and the establishment of one continental and global African nationalist government, and Ma'atian, or based upon Ma'at, truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, reciprocity, and order. I like to add Ubuntu in that normally, yeah. So Ma'at, Ubuntu, world order, yeah. There are 3 central themes of Pan-Africanism, which include Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, look to Africa, and one God, one aim, one destiny, kings and queens. Thus concludes the presentation, the politics and power of African identity. I hope ones and ones have got something from that. I've been going for about 3 hours now. Yeah. So we give thanks for all. Right. Are there any questions? And is there a will to discuss this today? Don't feel like you need to. Yeah, because we can come back. Another day, yeah, to discuss. All right, but if there are any but if there is a serious will and desire, yeah, to jump on the panel and speak and discuss, then we can do that. Well, we can do that for a bit. May have run-ins, I'm on in, so you know what I'm saying. And if you're not in the UK, it's like after 11 o'clock in the evening right now. Yeah. So yeah. So any questions? One global government is tyranny, if you say so, bro. I think that depends upon the nature and style of the government. You know, but I get why you said that from your perspective. At the same time, that is what Papa Garvey was dealing with in terms of African people, a grand racial hierarchy, as he put it. Yeah, we're talking about nationhood, and how we construct and develop that nationhood is, you know, decided by our development as a people. All right, but yeah, that's that. Any questions? Are we truly returning to our land? Some of us are under various different guises. Not all of them are revolutionary or Pan-African in nature, but the returning to the land, there's a critical mass of us that need to return. The defining factor, however, is not necessarily just the return, but the institutions and the social organizations that facilitate and through we organize as we return. Yeah, that is the fundamental thing. Yeah. How is that even practical? It's practical in the same way that the United Nations is practical, the World Trade Organization is practical, that the World Health Organization and the IMF and the World Bank is practical, that NATO is practical, yeah, that multinational corporations are practical, that transnational corporations are practical. Yeah. And so we are affirming the practicality in the sense of the fact that these institutions are international, but not necessarily, we're not affirming the goals, the objectives, and the interests, yeah, and even in many ways the tactics and the strategies of these institutions. We are simply saying that if those institutions are practical, then African nationhood on a global level is no more or less practical than that. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. Those are tyrannies, my brother. Those are absolutely tyrannies. You know what I'm saying. Yeah. Well, we're not affirming the interests. We're just simply saying that global organization of African people is not only possible; it is a necessity for protecting our own interest at this stage of development. Yeah, we are fighting institutions that are global, and so our global presence is an asset in that regard. The difference would be how we organize those institutions and for what purpose. Um, uh, this have to begin somewhere, right? And currently, most of what we Pan-Africanists represent is still theoretical arguments. I strongly believe that we have to begin the process of physical organization. That's a harsh statement to make. Yeah, Pan-Africanists have been organizing for centuries at this point. Yeah, in name and otherwise. Yeah, so like proto Pan-Africanism in the 17 and 1800s, as well as the post the era post the coining of the term Pan-African. There needs to be higher levels of organization. There needs to be greater solidarity between various different organizations, and we need more effective organizations that are able to acquire and employ more resources. Yeah, and the most valuable resource that we are currently in deficit of is people. Yeah, because the minds of our people are channeled towards other agendas. The activity, yeah, the physical labor of our people is going to suit those agendas at the moment. Baba Kwame Ture was a stickler for the idea that we are currently in the battle for the minds of our people. Yeah, and so there are various different forms of political organization and activity that we can engage in with regards to that, one of which is political organization, but we need to be more creative in terms of how we employ political organization through media. Yeah, and then there are other programs in terms of agriculture and cooperatives of that nature, and wealth building, to negotiate the challenges of the capitalist system in which we live, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So yeah, you're correct that we need to there needs to be greater physical organizing, yeah, within in relation to the theoretical arguments. I would agree with that, but there are many organizations, and many of those organizations are doing work beyond the capacity of the organizations. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, why not affirm federalism? Yeah, but we did, bro. The book is called Black Africa: The Cultural and Economic Basis for a Federated State. Yeah, so that was affirmed, but federalism is still, a global order. That's the point. So yeah, that is true. But we still have little to show for its immaterial aspect currently. At least that's what's being perceived by many. That's correct. Yeah. But we have to also factor in that we're at war, right? So it's not. Yes, there is a level to which we have to take responsibility for being more effective, but there's also another level upon which we just have to accept that we've lost some battles along the way. Yeah, that we've won some battles and lost some battles, and some of the battles that we've lost have taken from us some of the gains of the victories that we've won. Yeah, that's just like part of it. You know what I'm saying? That's just part of the process. Yeah, so we can't just complain about that. We actually have to understand that as a part of the reality in which we live, and find more effective ways of organizing in that context. So I'm gonna go back just in case I've missed anything. And if there's anything that before like that, what I'm looking at right about now that you feel like needs to be addressed, then do bring it to my attention. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are best practices in terms of governance and centralization. Socialism doesn't work. Yeah, I haven't spoken about socialism, bro. That's not what I'm affirming. And there are best practices, and those best practices come from our own analysis of our indigenous spirit systems, and how we can update them and effectuate them in today's world according to our best interest. Yeah. So yeah, that's that. In that regard. So no, we're not caught up in the socialism versus capitalism that dichotomy, because we are not Westerners. Yeah, we can study it, hear all, but attend only to that which concerns you. All right, so we can study it and we can learn about it and we can draw the lessons from it, but we don't define ourselves according to it. And yes, I definitely agree that there needs to be more solidarity between these organizations because there are many, but their collective power diminishes their lack of cooperation. And agreed, and that work is taking place. Yeah, that work is taking place definitely on various different levels. You know what I'm saying? Civilize the backward tribes of Africa, Garvey said. Okay, what's your point? Yeah, we get to the point of just throwing out things because they're inflammatory in a conversation rather than making an intelligent point. If we understand, so if we read message to the people and understand the term civilized within the context of the time, civilization was often used as a synonym for industrial development. Yeah. And so when we look at message to the people in the course of African philosophy and the breakdown of the aims and objective number 8, we see that the civilization was in the context of the underdevelopment of the African continent that was being forwarded at the time by the colonizers. Yeah, so we get that. Yeah, so yeah, for throw it, I'm not sure what that has to do with the conversation. Like, it's just an inflammatory statement thrown in just to Marcus Garvey affirmed an African identity, yeah, among Africans on the continent and in the diaspora. That is the actual point. Capitalism, democracy, not ruled by priests or elders, is the modern way. Yeah, and then we have to look at deconstructing what is modern, yeah, and who defines what the modern way is, and so on and so forth. And in that context, what makes capitalism and democracy? Like, you know, because Britain is a democratic country, the United States of America is a democratic country. You know what I'm saying? And they export democracy to the world. And NATO is currently trying to restore democracy in Ukraine. You know, America invaded Iraq to spread democracy. You know what I'm saying? America and Britain, should I say, the West invaded Iraq to spread democracy. Democracy, crazy demo. Demonstration of crazy demonstration, yeah, as Fela and Nicola Pokuti call it. So yeah, we're not interested in and if you say not ruled by priests or elders, but it can be ruled by presidents and prime ministers and multinational corporations, yeah, and transnational corporations and multilateral organizations, yeah, like the IMF and the World Bank and so on and so forth. It can be run by all of those, but not priests and elders. That's an interesting one. Individual rights determine modernity, not ruled by the mob, elected or not. If you say so, I don't know if NATO is a mob, you know, if the United Nations Security Council is a mob, is the World Economic Forum a mob? Is the World Bank a mob? Is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is that a mob? Because they seem to define what modernity is at the moment. So, yeah, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. You know, what I like to see is organized Pan-African Congress on a grassroots level, because we know that governments won't bring that change. Yeah, and that's difficult, right? That's the challenge that we have, yeah. And that's one of the reasons why the African identity piece is so important, in the sense of, the idea is that if we can bring this to the consciousness of our people in meaningful ways, yeah, that it becomes second nature. We're developing people, future generations, that are behaving in the world, yeah, from a sense of an African center, in the same way that we do now move in the world from a sense of other centers, right? Whether they be our national borders in the islands, or the United States of America, or Europe, yeah, or whatever. All right, and so it's a longer process. Yeah, it requires like a generation of education and propaganda, to use Papa Garvey's terminology. But that's the point, right? That's the point of that reconstruction, that historical reconstruction, to make that that sense of identity operate on the subconscious or the unconscious level as most effective forms of identity do. Yeah. And so it takes consistency and reinforcement of certain messages and ideals and their application through institutions and so on and so forth. And I can think of many examples, but we won't go into that today. So I've hit the wrong button. I don't know what you're referring to there. What did you see? What do you see as the role of government to protect liberty or give people stuff? The role of any governing body is to protect the social institutions of the people. Yeah. That's what it is. I would affirm a people-centered social organization. Yeah. That involves a social order that allows us to include as many of the voices of the people as possible. And we learned this from our indigenous African spiritual cultural systems, yeah, whereby consensus was an aspiration in terms of governance, yeah, and whereby communities, nations had organizations that represented the different interests of the various different constituents, yeah, of the nation. All right. There's a good message by Mama Marimba Ani on African womanhood. Yeah, you can watch it on YouTube. And she breaks down social organizations among Igbo women and how that fed into the political and economic structure. And that was important because it was women in Igbo society, as it was in many other African societies, who controlled the market, the economic center, yeah, of the nation. And in Igbo cosmology, the market is sacred, yeah. And so that function gave the women a certain economic power that they wielded through social organizations, yeah. And so I believe that those kinds of institutions can be updated into governing principles today. Having said that, we are at a point right now that whereby we have to have some transition between that ideal and where we are now. So there are various different things I would entertain in terms of their effectiveness right now. We are also at war, and so there is a need, yeah, in certain forms of organization and leadership to have hierarchy, and to have hierarchy that has the last word, because that is the nature of war. Yeah, we don't always have time to acquire consensus, right? In a state of war, all right. We have to have developed people that have the wherewithal to make certain decisions that people have to move on. That's just the nature of war, all right. And so we have to look at both those dynamics and balance our ideal with our reality and work towards our ideal through progressive stages. Liberation is not an event. It is a process. And unless we understand it as a process, we are not having the correct conversation. So what I would affirm as an ideal, yes, I affirm it within the understanding of having to address the reality that we deal with right about now. So for example, I don't affirm capitalism as an ideal, but I understand the fact that we live in a capitalist society and therefore need to negotiate the challenges associated with that. Yeah, we need to be able to function within that reality, as Papa Marcus Garvey did. Exactly, Baba Shakara. It took Mao Zedong re-education of the entire population to produce China that you see today, and this is a fact, yeah. And this is something that I'm studying, the Chinese evolution. Supposed to be something years ago, but you get caught up in other forms of study. But the idea that, because there's two camps of thought, that the Cultural Revolution was a stain, it was totally ineffective, and the Cultural Revolution was, the ultimate form of social organization, and so on and so forth. And the truth, as far as I see, is in between. Yeah, it didn't produce the economic development that people suggested that it was designed to, but I'm not even entirely sure that it was designed to. The Cultural Revolution was designed to make the people them Chinese. Yeah, and from that Chinese basis, they were able to develop what they have today. Nobody would deny Mao's contribution to where China is today, yeah, and the strong sense of identity and culture that they have built this China on, whether you agree with their political or economic philosophy and activity or not, yeah. What is undeniable is that they have a strong sense of identity and culture and nationhood, which is the foundation of their political and economic development, yeah. So that's a reality. And the fact is that Mao, yeah, in that regard, was learning from a man by the name of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, yeah. Bearing in mind that Mao studied Marcus Garvey and the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. All right. Are you going to talk about? Am I missing anything? Are you going to talk about the old Pan African Congress sometime in the future? I'm not planning to. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Not Islam or Christianity, though. That it would have to be something new. Now, I affirm African spirituality. Yeah. Or Kimoyo. Indigenous African spiritual systems as an essential component of African liberation development. Yeah. And I say that not just out of the religious application, yeah, but because if we're looking at African philosophy, in terms of social organization, political organization, economic organization, the basic elements that we're going to find to inform our development are enshrined in our spiritual systems, yeah, because African spiritual systems are ways of life, yeah. They relate to how we look at nature, resources, humanity, what it means to be a human being, and so on and so forth. And so that has obvious implications. The cosmology relates to the ontology, and both of those relate to the axiology, the primary principles and values. At the same time, again, dealing with ideal and reality, the overwhelming majority of us right about now are Christian and Muslim. Yeah. And so what we say in that regard is that we must develop at least somewhat of an African-centered approach, yeah, to those religions, as well as the fact that indigenous African spiritual systems must be respected. Yeah. The demonization and the subjugation and the subordination of African spiritual systems must stop. And I think that once we affirm that, I think that the beauty of our African spiritual systems will manifest themselves, yeah, within institutions, and more of our people will be inclined, as Baba Nkrumah says, to return to the way. Define market. The market is the central institution that regulates the exchange, yeah, of goods and services among a people group. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, psycho. But also, like I said, the market within indigenous African spiritual systems carries a spiritual significance. Yeah, it is the institution that sustains the equilibrium, yeah, of the people. Yeah, rituals are done in market. There are market days that represent different spiritual principles and so on and so forth that reinforce the people's idea of themselves and their relationship to the cosmos, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so we have to look at market within the African context, and within the Igbo cosmology. Yeah, and there's a good video when it's on a channel called The Medicine Show, called Why the Market is Sacred, and it looks at the role of women in Igbo society, whereby the market cosmologically is seen as the place, the central spot that balances the forces of the universe. And so the market in this regard balances the different elements of the community, yeah, in that regard. Yeah, that's the dominant Eurocentric white nationalist pan-European narrative that suits their agenda. Do you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I get that. Right, I'm gonna wrap up soon, family, because there's no will to jump on the panel today. So if there is, leave it in the comments. Or this is a long video already, so I don't know if anybody's gonna get to this far in the video, but we'll see. Let's see. Tangible material progress will do. Taiwan richer than China and didn't even have Mao to. I don't even know if that's true, but Taiwan is a satellite of the West. So I don't know, like it depends on how you value sovereignty versus richness. I'm not sure if richness is the defining factor in what I'm saying. Britain is in a lot of that different economic problems right about now because it left the EU. But as far as the British people are concerned, they prefer their sovereignty. So I hate that. No religion for Africa, cultural identity is what will unify. And that has been the major theme in what I've been saying. The African identity is based upon an appreciation for what African culture is as a cohesive agent, among our people. And we're not utilizing our culture as a cohesive agent at the moment. That is the point. And so it's about developing frameworks and institutions that allow us to do so. BS Garvey was a commie, don't bring it. So what? I mean, Mao was a commie, don't bring Garvey into this, but it's a fact, Mao and Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh even attended the International Convention in 1920. And apparently, I think Mao might have been there too, and they all ordered copies of Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey at some point, and they read it. They were inspired by Marcus Garvey. There's no doubt about that. So I don't know. That's just a historical fact. But so like obviously, if you come from a westernized, if you're affirming westernized, national institutions and multinational institutions, then the narrative that comes with that is what you're going to support. Nations and institutions that come with that is what you're going to support. This is about interests, right? So okay, let's say Taiwan are proud, wealthy Chinese didn't need a madman like Mao. Let's say that's the case. The Chinese are where they are, and they're very proud of where they are right about now. So even if Taiwan is richer than them, so what? You know what I'm saying? Like, you get me? So what? African sacred sciences, freedom is being shackled to your identity. Yes, I love that statement right there. Baba J. Small, freedom is being shackled to your identity. It's a beautiful. Nana Amos Wilson says, why is it that we are the only people that define freedom as doing whatever it is we want to do? And it just so happens that whatever it is we want to do empowers our enemies and disempowers ourselves. No, a market is not centralized. This is all capitalist free market economy nonsense. I didn't say centralized. I said central institutions. So, for example, you have main markets like in different communities, and then you have a market in a different community, and you have a central market that unites those communities. Both of those dynamics take place within indigenous African societies. So you have to study indigenous African societies to tap into what it is I'm saying. But yes, if you have a market, and people are feeding into that market, then the market is central. You know what I'm saying? The market is central. There's no doubt about that. That's why they call it the market, the free market. They're not calling it the free markets. It's nonsense. And if that was the case, then there wouldn't be so much fight to get everybody to endorse the economy of the West. For everybody to use the dollar, and the stock market, you know what I'm saying, and the metrics associated with those institutions. The politics and economics of the world today is entirely centralized. Very, very centralized. This is an interesting point right here. You use Oxford Dictionary definitions, but reject the definitions of market and economy as westernized. You've missed the point, my brother. And again, I use some of those definitions, and I also used definitions to accompany those from African-centered scholars. Yeah, so it doesn't mean that all of the definitions that are in the Oxford Dictionary, and primarily today it was actually Wikipedia, because I said Wikipedia addresses the differences in the definitions and the history of the definitions, so it gives a broader perspective. I didn't use a lot of Oxford today. There was like one Oxford definition today. All right, so obviously you missed that explanation. But no, we're not slaves to the dictionary. Yeah, we understand that social phenomena has a history. Yeah, all right, and so we are entitled as people with agency to redefine terminology as it relates to our history and our development and our culture, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so yes, we learn and we adopt what is in our interest, and we reject what doesn't, and we modify what's in between. We're entitled to do that. It's an act of agency. So yeah, indigenous European societies rejected market economy. You don't know the history. I didn't make an analysis of indigenous European societies. Gold Gossip says yes, central banks literally own everything. That's why the global economy is so much in trouble. Yeah, but you're not attacking the global economy though. You're attacking indigenous African communities and central market systems, which you don't know or you don't understand. Right? So that's east of the back to next year. You know what I'm saying? Be like my brother. What are the methods you are using to convince Africans who follow non-African to think and live Pan-African way? Various different methods, presentations such as these, building of African-centered educational institutions, African-centered media institutions, you know, many of the same methods, yeah, and we wouldn't use all of the methods, right? But if Africans can be indoctrinated into anti-Africanness, yeah, then we feel like we can reaffirm pro-Africanness, right? That it's a process, right, that we have to go through. And so in as much as brothers and sisters who believe in various different political, social, economic, and religious ideals are going to teach about those ideals and develop along those lines, we'll do the same. It's just that, yeah, but ironic. What's the irony here? I'm not sure that's referring to. Oh, central banks on everything. Yeah, centralization is the problem, except for when the centralization is run by the dollar. You know what I'm saying? So commies who no longer exist, yeah, like Mao, yeah, what's it called? Yeah, from how long ago is more of a problem than the IMF and the World Bank, yeah. You know what I'm saying? This is the nonsense, because again, the political allegiances are to the West. So even though you can criticize the West, like you also have to protect the West against whatever the West considers to be an enemy, i.e. socialism. There has not been a socialist state strong in the world since the fall of the Soviet Union. And these people, among black people who feel that they have to fight these Western battles, spend all of their time, yeah, going on about socialism and communism, as though it's a significant political reality right about now, an economic reality right about now. It's nonsense. Yeah, but again, your political allegiances will define your program. I'm going to be on for 5 minutes more, Kings and Queens, and we're going to call it a day. So getting them in now. Yes, we identify based upon our worldview, i.e. African cultural paradigms, most definitely, yeah. And we understand that our worldview is organic and dynamic, yeah. Our worldview is dynamic in that it develops along with us as a people. We don't consider our worldview to be stagnant, and we don't consider it to be the ultimate truth forever and ever, Amen Ra, that nothing can be questioned, modified, or developed from it, outside of it, and them kind of things there. This is not an African concept, yeah, of truth, knowledge, or wisdom and development. All right. So our worldview means that we maintain certain fundamental principles, yeah, and in terms of how we relate to each other and the universe at large. You know what I'm saying? It's the principles that must be maintained in that regard. You believe in tradition for tradition's sake, if you say so. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think that the presentation today kind of I mean, what I've just said actually kind of negates that, but you know, you're entitled to your opinion. Just like white conservatives. Well, you would know them well in it. So, and given the amount of white conservatives that you tend to quote, I'm not sure you're in a position to make that accuse. centralization is socialism. Okay, if you say so, therefore, the world economy as it stands right about now is socialist. You know, the IMF is socialist, the World Bank is socialist, the World Economic Forum is socialist, the United Nations is socialist, NATO is socialist. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So give thanks, my brother. I would certainly take this advice. You know. Yeah, man, unlearn to learn. Master Jedi Yoda, you know, Master Jedi Yoda, you must unlearn what you have learned. Yeah. So yeah, kings and queens, the whole point of today's presentation is to affirm, yeah, the validity of African identity. All right. You don't have to affirm it for yourself. All right. I'd encourage you to if you are in fact an African. But you don't have to. But your lack of affirmation of it for yourself, yeah, is no bearing, yeah, on the fact that Africans apply it, yeah, and the fact that Africans feel the need to apply it in today's world. All right, so yeah, that's how it go, kings and queens. All right, so give thanks for checking it out. Yeah, I know I've been through a lot today, so feel free to rewind, come again. You know what I'm saying? And I thank you all for joining me. You know, for this. I like this. The Great Reset is my art. Yeah, man, because we control the reset, you know. We are reset the thing, yeah. We're moving into the age of happy. And another day we'll do a presentation on that, the age of happy. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And what that means, yeah, in terms of restoring the age of African genius. You know what I'm saying? You know? Yeah, I know. Yeah, you have to be on a certain level to understand where I'm just saying a while ago. You know what I'm saying? You have to be on a certain level to understand, you know, where I said just a while ago, you know what I mean? But yes, kings and queens, Tendam Wadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe, Kuzaimazu Mukulu, give praises unto our great ancestors, Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodie, African power for all African people, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.